welcome to the Tenet Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson here with my friend, partner, and former stuntman. You've seen him in a variety of television programs from the 80s and probably didn't even know it. Known to many as quite possibly the most interesting man in the world, Wes Brown.
Hey, Todd. Yeah, stunt work. Wow, that takes me way back. Yeah, I just kind of happened upon it. And I was actually at Universal Studios doing the tour, and I was walking along, and I tripped over something, and somebody's like, hey, get that stuntman over here. And so there was my beginning of my stunt work.
Your stunt resume is pretty impressive. I was checking it out. And
I can't wait to hear.
You did stunt work on some of the top action programs of that era. And let me read some of these shows that you worked on from your resume. Magnum PI. You were the stunt double for Larry Minetti, Rick White, right?
Okay.
The A-Team, Dirk Benedict.
Yes.
You're the Face Man's stunt double.
I got punched in the face a lot.
Mr.
Right.
T.
Right.
MacGyver. You did a little work with Richard Dean Anderson.
Love Richard.
Sonny Crockett, Don Johnson on Miami Vice.
Yeah.
Ben Jones, who was Cooter Davenport on the Dukes of Hazzard.
Oh,
he didn't do
Cooter.
a ton of work on that one, but
Well, that's because he wasn't that active.
Well, he was the mechanic.
Right.
The Fall Guy. So Colt Seavers, Lee Majors.
Yep.
And then on The Incredible Hulk, you were a stunt double for Bill Bixby, Dr.
Love
David
Bill.
Banner.
He was such a nice guy.
You did motorcycle stunt work on Chips.
Chips.
Yeah.
Eric Estrada. Yeah.
Larry Wilcox. John Baker on Chips.
Yeah.
And then on Airwolf, Jan Michael Vincent, you were the stunt double for his character, Stringfellow Hawk. And then on Simon and Simon, which I love, Simon and Simon. What a great show. Stunt double for Jameson Parker.
Yes.
AJ Simon.
Okay.
You did a little work with William Shatner on TJ Hooker.
Yeah.
I love that show.
Yeah, Bill's
mostly
awesome.
because of Heather Locklear.
Wow. Who doesn't like Heather Locklear?
And then you did Street Hawk, which was Rex Smith.
Oh, he had a hit back in the 70s.
He was a singer actor.
Yeah.
He also hosted Solid Gold after Andy Gibb passed.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep. His character, Jesse Mock.
Jesse Mock. What a great name for a character, too.
Right? I don't know how you do that all the time, but I'm always honored to be sitting here with quite possibly the most interesting man in the world.
Well, it just happens. These things just happen. They just kind of fall on my lap. And it's just been an honor to do all these weird things.
Especially a Tenet podcast?
That's the most honor I have.
Hey, we want to take a moment and thank you all for coming along on this journey with us, this thing we call Tenet. Last week released our 100th episode, and this week we officially celebrate crossing that threshold with a very special guest celebrating our 101st episode. It's been a wonderful ride thus far, bringing you interviews with all these phenomenal artists that we've had an honor of exploring, and we look forward to what the next 100 episodes hold. Please, if you enjoy what we do, share Tenet with your community. Remember to follow us on our social media on Instagram at Tenet Podcast and Facebook on our Tenet Podcast page. And of course, you can always find out more information and deep dive into our archives on our website, tenetpodcasts.com.
And I always like to tell people, if you don't like the podcast, that's all right. Share it with the people you dislike the most because they deserve it.
All right. We're absolutely over the moon to talk with our next guest, and I can't think of any better way to celebrate our 101st episode. She's an incredible artist, a creative force, publisher and editor of Zing Magazine, curator and one of the founders of the Dikeou Collection, and is celebrating a very special exhibition of her work with her mid-career smear, currently on display at the Dikeou Collection through February of 2023.
Yes. No, March.
Oh, March 2023.
Yeah, the equinox. I believe it's the 22nd of March. Spring equinox. Yeah, spring equinox.
Awesome. A very special welcome to Devon Dikeou.
Thank you.
Devon, thank you for taking so much time with us today and giving us a tour of your exhibition.
Sure.
It was really nice to hear it firsthand from the artists and kind of get into how you think about art and what you do. And with that, I would like to start off this episode with you kind of explaining a little bit about what you do as an artist and your thought process.
Okay. I like to kind of start. I think I'll kind of say what I say when I start the tour of the mid-career smear, because that gives a nice introduction to my thought process and how I go about making the stuff that you see here in the exhibition, which is curated by Courtney Lane Stell, by the way. So I began an artist as an intern, really. You know, everyone is making art in third grade, so I'm no different than anyone else there. But in truth, I began making art as an intern for a gallery in New York City named Tibor Danaj Gallery. And his gallery was at 41 West 57th. It's still in existence today, although he's not around. One of the things I did as an intern, they sent me down to their disused ladies' bathroom, which was like their basement between the 7th and 8th floors. And I organized their art forums, finding articles in the issue, back issues of that their artists happened to appear in. So I was looking for artists like Helen Frankenthaler, Carl Andre, Fairfield Porter, these type of artists, Red Grooms. But I came across a project by the artist Lucas Samaras, and as I recall, it was 3 double-page spreads, so 6 pages altogether. This is not entirely accurate, but that's how I recall it. The first double-page spread had a neo-abstract expressionist picture of a skeleton, painting of a skeleton. Underneath it said artist. The second double-page spread zoomed in and just had the head of the skeleton, and underneath it said dealer. And then the third double-page spread zoomed in even further, and you just saw the teeth of the skeleton, and underneath it said collector. And I was really interested in these. It's funny, I was just reading a book last night, and it was translated from German into English. And in German, they're always talking about positions, and so they translated everything into position. The position of the artist, the position of the collector, the position of the gallerist, the position of the viewer. That's what they would be talking about. And those were the things that I was interested in. But beyond even that, it was more like a Venn diagram, and I was always interested in that center part where all the positions were meeting all together. That's where I like to say it began. And then the very first group exhibition I was in a show curated by Kenny Schachter, and he was a curator for a place called Baca downtown, and his show was called From Sculpture. And the piece that I made was based on the directory board that you see in lobbies almost in any office building. But in particular, I replicated the directory board from the building at 420 West Broadway, which is where the Leo Castelli Gallery was housed, along with Ileana Sonnabend and a few others. But I went there and measured their sign, got the name of their sign, called the company that made the signs that was on a little sticker on the sign, and made a sign with all the names of the artists and the dates that the show was up and the curator and the place, just as if it was the sign at 420 West Broadway. I kind of got that because I was in New York in the beginning of the 90s and the late 80s, and Metro Pictures was, in my mind, the hub of really critical thinking, with Cindy Sherman and John Miller and, of course, Sherry Levine and Mike Kelly. And Sherry Levine had once been quoted saying in somewhere, about her photographs, I really wanted a Walker Evans, and so I knew I couldn't afford one. I might as well make one. And that's how she started appropriating the images of Walker Evans in that case. And I thought, well, if I can't be in a Leo Castelli show, which is a long ways away, I might as well make a Leo Castelli sign board. And so that's how I did it. And that started my career as an artist. I've made, the title of the series is called What's Love Got to Do With It? I've made about 180 signs of every group show that I've been in, including also 2 subsequent series, one of Zing Magazine Table of Contents. So all the people in Zing Magazine, there's 25 of those, and each iteration of the Dikeou Collection. So these 3 prongs of my practice are kind of creating that Venn diagram, the center of that Venn diagram and that in-between space. And so that's what I'm interested in, is that in-between space between all these kind of disparate tangents that go towards different positions.
And the catalyst was that one experience as an intern that kind of set you on that path.
It's funny. That internship was incredibly important in lots of different ways. And you see it throughout the show. And one of the people that we're lucky enough to have come through is Josh Franco, who is at the Smithsonian the National Archives. And he always he's always so clever, and he also worked before the National Archives at the Judd Foundation, so he knows a lot of the different places that I touch on. And he said, I'm going back, and he has the Tibor Dinaj archives, and he found my actual letter to get a job at Tibor's, and he sent it to me, which is very funny. I had lots of really big ideas. Yeah. I was changing the art world. Yeah. But it was a very important in-between time, and helped me to understand the different positions in the art world and how my work would ultimately fit in it, and does.
So when people come to see this mid-career smear, what can they kind of expect to experience or see?
Well, you hope that they see something that they can identify with. That's the ultimate goal, is that there's something in all the different things that I see in life, and try to point out that they can identify with in that in-between experience, whether it's, coming across gates that are no longer used for security purposes, or planters that are taken out of their context of a mall or an office setting, or newspapers that are slowly becoming obsolete, or business cards that no one carries any longer, or Rolodex that young kids don't even really know what they are, or, different infiltrations that are more kind of performance type, like eating a roast beef sandwich, or seeing a roast beef sandwich being, the roast beef being sliced, or, signing in to a time clock for the amount of time you look at art, or, experiencing chairs that seem to be chairs that popes may have sat in, or experiencing decor that is reminiscent of the White House and yet explicates the time period in which that particular White House, the Nixon White House, the problems that occurred then and still occur to this day, including energy crisis and corruption and things like that.
You hit on some political stuff, but it's not political art.
It's not political art. If political gets in there, it's just because, in a certain way, someone said, isn't everything political? I don't know who said that, but somebody said something like that. And I think there's a famous Jasper Johns quote, and since he has a huge retrospective of it, there's lots of Jasper Johns floating around everywhere. But didn't he say, make something, do something to it, do something else to it, and that's kind of, what you see here, or what you see is what you get, all the different colloquial things we can come up with. But there's, hopefully people can find something that they identify with in these in-between spaces. And if they don't, that's just fine too. Missing it is just as important as getting it, I suppose.
And I thought it was interesting when we took the tour right before we started the interview, is it really has a sense of nostalgia
Yes.
And also the mundane in a sense, you know, and I thought that was a really interesting. And then when you really explained, you know, being in between, the space in between, then it really kind of crystallized for me. So yeah, it's really interesting.
And, you know, I went to Brown University, and had a lot of semiotics there. They say, like, you know, in Colorado, they say, see you on the slopes. In California, they say, see you on the beach. At Brown, they say, see you in semiotics. So you get a lot of semiotics at Brown. And so the signs that are there in our lives that we have that make us see things in a different way. There's lots of pieces in my head that are not in the show. Things like one of the very first pieces that I did, which is a revolving door. And a revolving door is, you know, takes the air from outside, brings it into an in-between space, and then shuffles you into the new space. Dan Graham did a wonderful revolving door at about the same time. Obviously, his is the one that's known. But nonetheless, mine was a gesture at the same time of taking those in-between spaces and talking about how the mundane is equally important. And so in my version of the revolving door, I try to take the mundane and give it a little bit of a pedestal. So my revolving door, his pedestal is places like the Dia, which are, you know, pretty big pedestals. But I take mine more to the street or the way that we would know it. So it'll be a big pedestal whenever it gets done, but it'll be in terms of, say, the Plaza hotel door, or the MoMA, you know, replicating their doors. And or a nice one would be the Denver Art Museum, with the Denver Art Museum just opening. Though I noticed they did not have a revolving door. And there's, you know, the door is a nice metaphor, of course, because it's the thing that opens and closes between spaces. And at the Denver Art Museum, like a lot of cold places, like Scandinavian countries, they have a double or triple sets of doors. So you go in one set of door to get doors, or East Coast homes are like this too. You'll go in to the hallway, then you'll go into an antechamber, then you'll go into the front parlor, then you'll go into the place where, you know, people actually are sitting and speaking or something like that. So there's a number of different spaces before you get to this. It's compress and release, which is with the food of the show that Courtney curated, Talk With Your Mouth Full. And I made the bread, the Sally Lunn bread, and you know, you put all the ingredients in, and then it's compressed, and then you release, and then there's the beautiful bread. So you push everything together, and then it releases. And doors do that. They funnel you into a space, and then you're funneled out. But they are mundane. Chairs are mundane. Flowers are mundane. Gates are mundane. Business cards are mundane. But giving them a little pedestal.
Yeah, no, I thought it was brilliant. Once you can make the connection to it, then it really just opens up, you know, the brilliance of the whole collection, I think.
Sure. And the collection, you know, so we'll circle back to the collection in Zing Magazine for a second. The collection came out of Zing Magazine. You know, you get Zing Magazine. How does that start? Well, it starts because first thing I'm doing is reading Art Forum, and they've got artist projects. And I was like, well, the magazine is an in-between place. It's where they report on the artwork. And, you know, it posits it in some kind of historical fashion, or at least historical fashion within how long someone keeps a piece of printed matter. And collecting in itself is, again, that archival gesture towards what's worth keeping, what isn't, and making those editing and transparent decisions that, you know, what gets in the magazine, what gets in a collection, what gets in the curated show, these choices, and finding that as a medium. And so when I started Zing Magazine, it was an opportunity to go and see artwork before, in between it gets to the actual walls of the gallery, because that's really the interesting place where the ideas are happening. By the time it gets to the gallery, you know, the ideas have been parsed and edited, and they're very good. But it's also fun to see the messy behind the scenes scene. And then with the collection, with the opportunity of making those things come to life in the pages of Zing magazine, which turned out, it was started as an art project. I had a windfall of about $1,300, and I thought, I could make a magazine with this $1,300, and I could ask all these different people to do something. And so Kenny did something, and Amy Silman curated a beautiful section of drawings with like Louise Bourgeois and Nicola Tyson in it, and Jim Nutt. And that started it. And then I got the magazine bug and kind of took over for a good period of my 30s. And then I started showing again and starting, and I saw in the magazine that there were these beautiful projects that never maybe even made it to a gallery space. They were just projects on paper. So I thought, well, this is an opportunity to take something that is and bring it from its in-between existence to another place. And that's how we started the collection.
Wow, I'm glad you spoke to that, because I did want to ask you about Zing magazine and how that kind of happened.
It started in 1995. It's about 25 issues. I'll just give the who, what, where, when, so people can get that. It's approximately 300 pages per issue, sometimes more, sometimes less. We give people 2 to 16 pages to do redactionally pretty much what they want within some editorial give and take. And we've done 25 issues so far. The next issue will come out in 2024. We come out irregularly. We tried to come out quarterly. That's a harder gig than one can muster up sometimes. But it still keeps going, which is a real triumph in the age of print right now. And the collections really began in earnest in 98. It opened to the public in 2004. We have approximately 40 artists and growing. We try to collect in depth. So that comes from the magazine. We would get a project like Royal Art Lodge, and, we didn't want just one drawing. You really want them all. All of them tell the story. And that's a group of artists that make 40 drawings about Christmas, and that's just as powerful as, say, Momio Teramitsu's Somehow I Don't Feel Comfortable, which are the 2 giant pink bunnies, which are maybe our iconic piece because it's the first piece you see when you come in. We're interested in those pieces that are maybe harder to collect for other people, but that not only do we have the space, but we have the patience for the viewer to grow up, the viewer that loves the bunnies, but when they're a kid, but comes back for the Reiner Ganal seminar lecture series. So you see both audience and lectures, and it's kind of a travel diary of pieces. Or you come to be on top of the Wade Guyton, but come back to see it later. Enjoy some of the more difficult pieces in a later time, in as well as the ones that catch your eye when you first get here.
So you want people to come back time and time again.
I have a huge respect for the history of contemporary art at first, but also minimalism. And I'm kind of the Judd school. I think that there's a huge value on the return visit. And that's for the viewer. It's not for the institution. The institution gains value by having more viewers. And so that leads to a programming idea, the idea of programming, completely valid, important, but the return viewer is something that we're interested in having the viewer experience something over time and what happens when that happens. And having mid-career smear, which is the first time that we've ever changed a collection, because as it sits in the collection, which is in an office building, and small little rooms almost dedicated to 1 or 2 artists each, it continues to grow by adding, not by inserting. Once in a while, when we find that 2 artists have a really nice relationship, then we put them together. But we're not trying to rehang the show in periods, but rather it just continues. And with the mid-career smear, this is the first time that any of it has been taken down, except for when something is lent. And we're very, that's a huge priority on our, as collectors, agenda, is to lend the work for people to see it in huge group settings in places other than Denver. That's a huge priority. And the Crawling Japanese Businessman, the Miata, has been to 6 cities. We bought it only after it had crawled in New York, and it has crawled since New York in London, Amsterdam, Paris, Sao Paulo. I think it's Sao Paulo, might be Buenos Aires, and Sydney.
Wow.
At any rate, as I said, the mid-career smear is the first time that the artwork has been removed. And as you can see, there are ghosts of all the collection there. So the Wade Guyton still remains the most permanent piece in the collection, and Lizzie Bugatsis' ice piece is in the pop-up. And when you were there, Todd, it wasn't there, but now it is there. And so that space is much more dedicated to the temporal art pieces. And so the ice sculpture melts in a few hours, whereas the block is there always. But while you're walking around and seeing the mid-career smear, it's resting in the Dikeou collection, and you see the ghosts of these other pieces, the holes in the wall where they're hung. And this is here for a while, and then the other will come back, and you can see your old friends again with a few new.
I love that. I love that concept and that idea. And I was very taken the first time I came to visit, because I had no idea that this even existed. And for our listeners, we are currently in the offices of the collection doing this podcast. And we're in the Colorado building on the 5th floor, 1615
Yes.
California Street here in Denver, Colorado. And if you haven't experienced it for yourself, you need to put it on your list of things to go see for sure. It is truly an experience, and I highly recommend doing so between now and March of 2023.
Also, I want to, and he's telling the truth, because he went through the show, and then after he left, he called me on the phone. I was working, and we spent the next hour to 2 hours talking about the collection just over the phone. So he's right on the button. He was so excited seeing the collection, and it is, and today is the first time I've seen it, and it's a wonderful collection. And we got the tour from, Devon herself, and that just like opened everything for me. And there's an audio tour that you take when you come through it. So
yeah, the audio tour is not unlike a lot of tours. So you just pick a song. So the first piece, let's say, it's the UN General Assembly replication of the marble behind which all the speakers speak. And if you dial it up on your cell phone, you get Barack Obama singing Amazing Grace. The Trump wall is Under Pressure. The 90 pieces is all 5 pieces, I think, are The Cure. There's others. I always remember the beginning of all the tours, which is funny because you can, on the cell phone tour, you can see what people actually dial in. They listen to about the first 2, and that's it. So it's always the first 2 pieces. And I'm the same way. I can remember the first 2, but there's lots of fun songs there. And just to reiterate what Todd was saying too, you can find our hours on the website, which is the DikeouCollection.org. And we're open Wednesday through Friday by appointment. So go on there. It's pretty easy to make an appointment Wednesday through Friday, business hours.
And I want to reiterate that what you're going to see right now is all Devon's work. The collection will come back probably in 2024, I imagine.
Yes, I think that's a good goal. We're also thinking of some other things, but it's too early to talk about them at this point. We might do something with fashion. We might even do something with a temporary fair, art fair type thing.
Oh, fun.
But eventually the collection will be back in all its glory. And I know a lot of people are looking forward to it. So we'll see how that works out.
But in the interim, come down and check out Devon's work because it's absolutely exquisite. And it's, I found it breathtaking. Like Wes said, I probably spent a good 3.5 hours here. I thought I was going to get a ticket because I parked on the street. And then I probably spent another, like you said, at least an hour or so talking about it after the fact. And I got to experience it again today, but I need to come back once again. I feel like even at least another time or two. How many pieces are in this current exhibit? Something like 60 or something like that?
Gosh, I don't really even know, but at least 80.
80, okay.
Because some rooms have more than one, and I think there's about 60 rooms. But there's a lot. And also the pop-up space, which is on Colfax in between Grant and Logan. It's the old Jerry's record store, and it has, besides some really fun art, both in the Dikeou Collection, like the Lizzie Bugatsis, which we said, but also in the mid-career smear. But it has 14,000 vinyl, a library that is left over from Jerry's. And we always have DJs there when we have openings. And the next one will be on the winter solstice on December 22nd. So get your mittens and gloves and your muffs out, and there'll be a performance with Santa. So it should be a lot of fun.
I've been to 2 of these events at the pop-up, and both were spectacular, I thought. So look for that on our social media, and definitely look at that on the Dikeou Collection website.
Sure.
And this is essentially, like 30 years worth of your work?
Yes, it's a little more because we've included a few of... There's a great quote from Woody Allen. I think it's Purple Rose of Cairo, but I might even have that wrong, where he's in the limo and he's like in Connecticut somewhere, and it's shot from inside the limo, and here come all these housewives, and they're hitting the window with their knuckles, and they're trying to find the genius that has made the movies, which is, of course, Woody himself. And they're shouting at him, "We really like your early funny work." And sometimes I feel like that, because the early work is always the stuff that is drawn to people. And I was just reading in a different website the other day, and Dennis Scholl was asked, he's a collector in Miami, and he was asked what his favorite piece in his collection was. And I thought his answer was just the best. And it's the same for an artist. What's your favorite piece? The piece I just bought in case of the collector, the piece I just made in the case of the artist. So I thought that was a nice way to answer that kind of question. But it is a little over 30 years of work.
And you work very differently. You are not a studio artist.
No. So, all right, let's just bring up, since we said my favorite piece is going to be the one I most recently made. Here we go. It hasn't even been made yet. I was speaking with Haley, who is our director, and she's also been on the podcast, and she's typing away furiously over on the right. Say hey, Haley.
Hi.
And so check out her podcast too. But, a lot of the pieces, we were still making art even because of the pandemic. We opened just before it hit. And so we were literally open 10 days and then closed for a year and half, just like everybody else. So while that was going on, I was still finishing up artworks and thinking of other artworks and getting things done. And I said to Haley, gosh, the most in-between place is the elevator, and there's so many great elevator artworks. My favorite, of course, being the Richard Archschwager elevator piece, where you go into a room and it just sounds like you're going up an elevator. But I said, I've got to have an elevator piece. So this is the elevator piece. And since I do like things that are analog versus electric and or digital, or more contemporary ways of information being communicated, versus really old ways. For the elevator, I'm going to make a hand-blown glass hourglass, and the sand, as you get on the elevator, you can turn it over and it'll show you. So if you get on 7, the sand will be at the top. You turn it over and it'll go down by floor and be empty by the time you get to 1. Or if you do the other way, it'll start at, 1 and go down to 7, by the time you get to 7. So that will be the elevator piece, and that's my new current favorite. Doesn't have a title yet, but it will.
So that's in process right now?
Yes, it's in process.
Wonderful.
It's the concept has occurred. Now we got to make it a reality. There's lots of things that are hard to do.
Yeah.
You got to find the glass blower. You got to make sure the time works. You got to be able, it's got to turn, and it's got to be installed securely in the elevator. A lot of things go into that time, little hourglass timepiece, but I like it.
Can you talk about coming up with that concept? What was that like?
Well, it was thinking about an elevator. And, I had a friend years and years ago, and the person was a really strict kind of person in the way they, ketchup can only be on the side, not on top of the French fries. Don't look at the elevator numbers when you go up, that kind of thing. And I always thought that's this, because I'm not that person. Whatever, you better look at what floor you're getting off on. You got to kind of pay attention. But the elevator is a funny place, isn't it? And what I think his gesture in that is noting what an awkward place it is. Like, how do you engage that person that you share the elevator? And the pandemic's made it even more so, because some people say, I don't want to go up on the elevator with you. Are you going to be masked? All of these different things. So it's an even more of that kind of place. And you automatically have a relationship with a person for, 15, 20, 40, 50. If you're going up a really tall building, it's a lot. And, so I started thinking, well, what other ways could you, and the Dikeou Collection is 7 stories. The building was originally 5. We're on the 5th floor, so we were originally on the top floor, but now it's 7. And so 7 is almost that in between a really big skyscraper and a really small size skyscraper. And our elevator is an Otis elevator, which was the original elevator company in America. And in Soho, the very first elevator in New York was placed in the Hawat building, which is a cast iron building. I did this art piece, which is a performance art piece, and we're still trying to figure out how we can make it be an actual thing that's not just a performance, but it's a tour of all of Soho. And the reason why there is a Soho, because originally it was supposed to be decimated by Robert Moses's urban planning, which would have taken a freeway straight through Soho to New Jersey and would have killed all of those cast iron buildings. The artists rose up, including Gordon Matta Clark, most famously, to save Soho, and they made it into the artist in resident zone. And you have to actually be a registered artist to work and live, although that has been stretched immensely in modern times. But I do have that certificate, so I am legal to work there. But one of the things is in the Hawat building, which is on the corner of Broome and Broadway, is one of the grand dams of the cast iron time. And it's modeled after the buildings on San Marco in Venice. So they went over to Venice, they cast the buildings in San Marco, and they came back to New York and they poured it into cast iron. They built 2 brick walls and then brought in these cast irons and put them on the sides. And it was the first building that was over 5 stories. So 5 was the thought that if it's 5, you can walk the stairs. And that's the first one that they put an elevator in, and it's right there on the corner of Broadway and Broome. And it has a little plaque and everything. And I talk about the first building that had a notice elevator. So I have had a long relationship with elevators. And that tour happened, which is actually in Zing magazine. It was a really lovely piece. In the early 90s, Natalie Rivera, who was a pop-up dealer, renegade is the word I was looking for earlier. Rogue and renegade was how we talked about curators in the early 90s. It wasn't pop-up, but she was a renegade dealer, and she and the artist Elsie Armstrong started this thing called the Women's Group. And the idea is that women artists are not necessarily that supportive of one another, and that they tend to be more competitive with each other, and that supposedly men are more supportive. We think of the famous story of Rauschenberg sharing a studio with Johns and bringing Leo Castelli to see Johns's work. Well, you got to know there's a little jealousy there too anyways. But the story had been in the ethos of art making that women are not supportive of one another. So this was an idea that women would get together once a month. We'd visit each other's studios and talk about art or read a book, or each artist had the opportunity to kind of lead the thing. And when it was my turn, and it started out as a kind of more conceptual artists, and then it became much more of a painters group of women. But when I was the artist that was leading the month, what I did was a tour of Soho. And so it was this kind of thing like how we just did of my artwork, but around Soho. And so this tour started off in Janine Antoni's loft, and Brian Antoni, who was a male, obviously with the name Brian, but kind of like the mascot of the female group. He was there, and he was my compatriot in all little devilish things. So I had given him the phone number of a payphone on Broadway, because the tour starts on Broadway. Her loft building is catty-corner to the Hawat, but in that other building, which was a famous glass and kind of like Tiffany's, but not Tiffany's, it's a store. Her loft was in that building, catty-corner to the Hawat. And so I wrote down all the names of the women that happened to attend that week. And I gave him the number, and I knew how long it would take to get from the Hawat to the telephone booth. And I said, okay, the phone's going to start ringing, and I'm going to be right behind the telephone booth. And I'm going to say to one of the ladies, go pick up the phone. And so I did. I said, Elsie, go pick up the phone. And so Brian's like, give me Beth Haggard. We went through all the women in the group, Alana Herzog, Nicola Tyson, I don't remember, Carrie Charlin, Janine Antoni, whoever was there, Andrew Zattel, Natalie Rivera. And so it was the old telephone game, but with a real telephone in the place where the original very first telephone connection happened, right there in Soho. So that elevator kind of telephone, these kind of weird things which are mechanical, I'm very interested in them, in how these things operate in between. And in Zing magazine, Natalie reached back to a number of the different women in the group. The group lasted about 2 years, which is pretty strong, and had people write down their recollections of it. And I think it's a really excellent piece. And I'm hopeful that we develop it into a book, not just of the women, but of all the renegade art that was happening back then, from Alana Herzog starting, PS1, essentially. And, we can even take it back to Stieglitz, the photographer, his space on Lower Broadway, Fifth Avenue, 192, I think it was called, or 196. He was the first person to show Picasso and Matisse in America, and much less Georgia O'Keeffe. And Georgia O'Keeffe, I think she gets plenty credit. So I shouldn't say she gets a short shrift, because she gets plenty credit. But I, as an artist, kind of underestimated her until I read some biography. And then I was like, yeah, she really had the chutzpah, and her importance reemerged to me as a female artist for sure. But I really do want to do, because that's how I started reading art forum. I want to give the art world that history, which is very ephemeral. And if it's not documented, it will go away. And that's what's so interesting about doing a podcast. As you guys know, this is my first podcast, and I didn't really even know what one was, but it's a really great opportunity for me to learn, but also it's a great opportunity for the audience. One of those positions that we talked about at the beginning, to kind of learn the history and for it to be archived in a different way. And hopefully we can make that happen both today and in the future with this project that I just spoke about. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm glad that you talked about that whole experience, and for people that want to see more or listen to more of these recollections of this women's group, you can find it in, this is the current issue. Yeah, the current issue of Zing magazine.
Yes.
Issue 25. And I did read your recollection, and I love that story.
Yes.
I mean, there was a lot of thought put into making that happen for this group of women that you were giving this tour to. It's just a wonderful, wonderful story. Have you always been interested in history? Have you always been curious?
Yes. Well, I love history. I love stories. And this is really sad, but I've been to 5 funerals this summer, kind of a sign of the time, although only one funeral revolved around COVID. But I'm just at that age where people our mortality is more prevalently apparent to us. But everyone always says what a great storyteller someone is. But I do love stories. And I don't know that I'm such a great storyteller, but I love the stories that themselves, and I love how they get made and how that elevator got to be at that place. And it was just out of necessity. What made it so that they decided that on that particular spot in Broadway, they would have a telephone? What made them decide to save all of those buildings other than that they were artists and needed cheap places to live, and these were the buildings that they had? And what great tour de force luck, because Robert Moses is a force to be reckoned with, and that they stopped that freeway from happening is pretty incredible. And that goes to kind of the piece that is in the show, which is one of the more recent favorite ones, which is Café de Florence and Les Deux Magots and Saint-Germain-des-Prés. If these walls could talk, what could you hear? What could you hear someone say? And the heart and the head, we're always struggling, all of us, with that. And Thomas Jefferson puts it so nicely. But I think every artist, every person has those struggles daily. And artists are kind of there to point those struggles out. And whether it's a writer, whether it's an architect, whether it's a dancer, whether, whatever the platform, that struggle to find those in-between moments and bring them to the forefront for others to notice or enjoy. Hate is just as powerful. Not notice is just as powerful. So that's my thought on stories. I'm always happy a new one too. Isn't it nice to go to sleep with a story? By the way, I went to sleep to Magnum last night, and it was the U.S. versus Rick Orville, what's his last name? Wright. Orville Wright. And he thinks that Ice Pick has committed murder, and he takes the blame that, Magnum straightens him out there. And he has to be the hardball. TC's the soft one, and then Magnum says to TC as they get into the Ferrari, he says, "Do you think I was too hard?" He goes, "Someone's got to be." He goes, "Next time it's going to be you." He goes, "Nuh-uh." And then this is a funny one, because the night before going to sleep with Magnum, Jessica Fletcher was visiting Robin's Nest. Because remember, Robin is a famous writer, and naturally he travels in the same circles as Jessica. And there was some trouble at Robin's Nest, and Magnum's PI credentials were not good enough for whatever troubles had occurred. And so Higgins, God damn him, had called Jessica to straighten everything out, which really made Magnum upset. But Jessica put him at ease, as she always does with everyone. I watch a lot of TV. That's it.
And you talked about this before, and I know, I mean, we've only met a couple times previous to this, but I was amazed by your recollection of TV and movies and just pop culture, in addition to your encyclopedic knowledge of art. It's just a wonderful experience. Have you always been like enamored with pop culture and television? I mean, we grew up, all of us, Wes, you and myself, grew up in really kind of a golden age of television shows. Sure. Did you watch a lot of television as a child? Definitely.
I had the really either misfortune or good fortune, and I go with good, to have parents that were kind of doing their own thing and didn't care that maybe there was some bad influence on TV. They had 100 other things that they were doing, which were really cool, whatever they were doing. And so when I got home, I went straight to the TV. I had a chair. I could put my legs over the arms of the chair and just snuggle right up there with my best friend, Niney. And I hit Gilligan's Island. Then I Dream of Jeannie. Then after that came Star Trek. And then after Star Trek there's Hogan's Heroes right at either before or after, double feature of Hogan's Heroes. And then it's dinner time. And then I have to kind of go do some homework. And then if it's Wednesday, which is bowling night for my parents, great opportunity. I get the Bionic Woman, Beretta, then Charlie's Angels. And of course they knew I was watching TV. And my dad, of course, he had the TV that's the console that's like a piece of furniture, so it has wood all around it. Well, that thing went out when I'm about 8. So then he just uses that to put the new color TV because it's the perfect stand. So we have a TV on top. We're making a Nam Jim Pike here, a TV on top of the TV. And he's very interested in sports. And you were asking about sports earlier, but he would have the non-working TV and the football on the TV, and then it's right about now, where baseball's still going, and he'd have baseball on the radio. So the TV is turned down and he can listen to the baseball game because there's no better way to experience baseball. I think it's wonderful on the radio or color and play-by-play. So it's always around. So TV is always around. And I'm always curious. I lived at the Denver Art Museum, but the Denver Art Museum didn't have a lot of contemporary art, only every once in a while. So I saw Arm & Hammer soup tureens. I saw, their huge, wonderful, now we're not supposed to say pre-Columbian, so it's Mesoamerican. So it had a wonderful collection of that, and also pretty strong European collection. And the library was right next door, and I loved the library. And I love tattered cover. The independent bookstores shouldn't be underestimated. And for me at that time in Denver, those were, where you went. There was a few kind of groovy stores, but that was the Mecca to find your information. Also, my mom had tons of catalogs. So the mail, was always really excited to see the Horchow collection. It's like from Chicago, and there's like lots of things that you can buy, or all the different catalogs that would come in, and you go like this, well, look at this. So I love that.
Now, you alluded, like most other kids, you got to engage with art as a child. Were your parents involved with the arts? Were they patrons of the arts?
Not my dad so much. His patronage comes with just being supportive and letting me kind of fulfill my dreams. My mom, she's the brownie leader. She's making crafts. We're crafting a lot. Every Christmas we're making something different. whether it's Christmas tree ornaments or something like that. She is an excellent cook. She has certificates from Cordon Bleu and Gritty Palace for Italian. So I'm always her sous chef. So cooking has been in my training area as much as art. And she's an excellent decorator. And her best friend and compatriot was a man named Frank Dose. My mom's name is Lucy Dikeou. My dad's name is John Dikeou. And my mom's best friend and compatriot was a guy named Frank Dose. And he was a decorator that had just the most exquisite taste and decorated our home here and many other homes here in Denver. We were just talking about it, my brother and I. He did Murray Motors, for example. That was maybe one of his big public commissions. And we were wondering if there's any houses that still exist that he decorated. But it kind of leads me to the piece where the Wade Guyton is with the LSD wallpaper. My mother's initials are Lucy Sharp Dikeou, so I always refer to her as LSD. And she'd get angry. She would wig out because in drug education, when someone's having a bad LSD trip, it's called wigging out. Like on Dragnet, they're wigging out, And so she's called the Wig and LSD. And anyways, her powder room had this really great psychedelic wallpaper that she and Frank picked out. And one of the funny things that occurred at the opening was, a number of people took pictures of their kids and things like that. And so someone took a picture of their kid in front of the wallpaper. They posted on Facebook or some other social media. So somebody else wrote into the Dikeou Collection, "Oh my God, we have the same wallpaper growing up." And so then they took a picture of themselves in front of their wallpaper, which the same thing because my brother lives in the house that we grew up. Her brother lives in the house that she grew up in New York City. And so that was funny. We talked about it and we said how we remade the wallpaper in the room where Wade Guyton's piece, the room moved the way block is, which is a gigantic parquet block, very 70s in execution, in color. And so the ceiling's painted like canary green, and then the wallpaper, which is like fish scales, but of magenta, yellow, black, white, turquoise, a bright tomato red, and I know I'm missing orange, of course, orange, all those colors. And it goes all the way up. And then at the ceiling, the fish scales stops. So the ceiling's green and the fish scales are like that. So they hadn't done it quite that way, but they had the same wallpaper. So we wrote back and forth, and then they sent another picture of themselves. And in our house, we had 2 bathrooms that Frank did. And the other bathroom had this, you sometimes see it on the inside of old books where they've got some oil paint and they've got kind of a squeegee and they put the colors down like this and then they drag it and it makes kind of a wavy little rainbow, but they'll probably put a lot of blues together, a lot of wine colors or yellows and then whites, and they'll just choose one color and do that. Well, in both houses, we had yet another powder room with the exact same wallpaper. And we didn't have the same decorator, so that was funny. But Frank, God rest his soul, was a huge influence on my life as well, seeing him draw all these houses that they were, because my mom was a spec house developer, and they would draw the houses and then go build them with my mom, and Frank's brother built them while Frank designed them, kind of thing. So
that's so interesting.
He was a big influence on all of us as a really creative force. But my mom too, as I said, she's the brownie leader, Troop 52.
So you grew up with a maker.
Yeah.
And obviously that affects you as a child. You take some of that in some way.
Yes.
You take that with you, right?
Of course. And my dad's influential too in a different way. There's a lot of pieces that aren't in the retrospective that are huge. The first piece after the directory boards that I did, which I did in Cologne, Germany, in a 2-person show with Janine Antoni. And my piece was I paved my part of a 3-part gallery with asphalt and created a section of 100-space parking lot. And it's called Asphalt Jungle Pay Here, which is the title of the very first movie that Marilyn Monroe is like a cameo appearance in. And it has Jimmy Durante in it as well. And it's a section of that 100-space parking lot, and the stripes are there and the numbers are there. And it's kind of talking to the minimalism of Andre and certainly of Judd and what space means, but also what line means and what the red dot means, what the sail is. I mean, when you go to, like, say, at that time for me, Southland was like just the most enormous parking lot in Denver. And I'm sure by today's standards, it's, nothing. But Southland is just like, oh my God, that's huge. And, which parking spot are you going to take? And, now it's really becomes an issue. So that idea of the parking lot as certainly the segue or in-between place, and the car, is that the piece that holds all security keymaster, that holds all the keys for all the directory boards. Those are used for valets. Everyone who checks their car with a valet, their keys go on one of those little things, and that box holds the valet, for the valet, the key of the person who's gone elsewhere and is there in that place when it takes them to their next place. So that in-between holding place.
Are there other large pieces that didn't make it into the exhibition?
Oh, there's plenty of them, but that's, lots of them. I said the revolving door and the asphalt jungle. Those are 2 of the big ones. But I hopeful to do other ones with scaffolding in natural spaces too, where you involve, landscape. So we want to eventually do the parking lot, both a parking lot within a parking lot. I love Chinese boxes, which is what Mrs. DeMenil's liquor closet is. It's an art collection of art within a house that's abstract, like the parking lot is abstract. It's in Mrs. DeMenil's house. And then Mrs. DeMenil is a collector who has a museum. And now all of that has been both in an art fair, and then the art fair is transposed into another museum, which is now housing a retrospective. So like box within a box within a box. And so I want to do the parking lot in a parking lot. And then I want to do the parking lot in a natural setting so that it juxtaposes it against the natural setting, much like we talked about with Cajole, a fake plant displacing a real natural environment. And even if the natural environment is just a vacant lot, and so those are the 2 big outdoors ones, but there's others, but they're so on the drawing board. I feel uncomfortable to really
go in detail.
Yeah, much more than what I have.
Gotcha.
But those are big ones that started in the 90s, so I know pretty much where they sit. But originally, the idea was to have where the gates are, the first big gallery, to have that all be the parking lot. But the building's too old to sustain that kind of weight. And so you have all kinds of things. Like in Germany, when I went in the early 90s, right after the wall had come down, there's a beautiful Bauhaus building. It's the Kunstmuseum, designed by Mies van der Rohe, and it was housing Kiefer exhibition, and Kiefer's paintings are so heavy, as we know. And so they had to reinforce the building some gazillion, I think, like $100 million to reinforce it for the Kiefer, but maybe not quite that much because it is the early 90s. But still, it was an astronomical amount of money to reinforce that building to hold all the Kiefers. It was exquisite, by the way. If you want to have a retrospective in your Alzheimer Kiefer, and it's in a Mies van der Rohe building in Berlin as the wall is coming down, it just can't get better. It's got all the symbolism that is there for his work. But it was pretty, it was pretty interesting, but that happens.
So what was the catalyst for you to decide to do this mid-career smear? Was that Courtney? Had you been thinking about it?
Well, I think that you always are thinking about it. You go in 92 and you see Alsheim Kiefer in a Bauhaus building by Van der Rohe, just as the wall is coming down and what his work is about. And you say, wow, where will mine be? And you just have to do that. Just like any kid who's playing baseball is like saying, it's at the bottom of the ninth and I'm third at bat, 3 outs or 2 outs and 3 men on base and I'm hitting the grand slam or whatever it is. Everyone has that dream. So you're always thinking about that. I met Courtney. She was curating a show at the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art. And I met her and we had a meeting at Studio City. And she was also curating the show, the biennial exhibition. And I met her there and showed her my pieces on a PowerPoint. And that's how we started working together on those shows first. I had been working on the retrospective previous to that. I do have to say that going, like I use the Kiefer example, but there's many others, another is going to the Venice Biennale and seeing anybody that shows in the François Pinault Palazzo Grassi, whoever is showing there, makes you really think, if I had a palazzo, what would I do? And, you have then, and I'm always a spatial artist. I think that that's one of my strengths is as a spatial artist. I have a very good sense of space and it's because I choose things that are based on the human scale. So, the gate, I'm not making a painting just like Barnett Newman is and saying, okay, it's got to be big. It's got to be mural size. It's got to be this. Is it going to be 10 feet? Is it going to be 12 feet? Or is it going to be 14 or 16? I'm going to the actual gates and measuring them. And these actual gates are based on a store opening, which is based on what a store can actually rent for. And so I'm ahead because I'm doing something that's based on a human scale. A revolving door is based on a human scale. So these things that I'm choosing, a cash box is based on, how big a coin is and how heavy money is. It can't be that big because it's too heavy to carry. These types of things are based on what is physically possible. So that's really easy. So in terms of scale, you're thinking in these rooms, your work fits within these rooms pretty easily. It's just a matter of finding that. So then I had been thinking about it, but it was the Damien Hirst show and the Rudolf Stengel show at Palazzo Grassi. These are people that are my peers, Stengel older, but Damien Hirst, I believe, is the same age or within 1 or 2 years, that you kind of say, okay, this is what, and with Damien Hirst and Rudolf Stengel, money is no object. It's just kind of like you've won the lottery and go and do what you do. And they both did it so impeccably well. We're not even talking about the concepts. They just did it so well. Every single detail is thought of. If I approach any of that with this, I'm happy. But that's my thought process is you go room by room and do what fits that room the best within what you're making. And then also do these pieces like Ring My Bell. That's a piece from 1990. It's a piece that's an old piece, but sometimes the early funny work is really good and does need to be included. And with Courtney, after working with her on the 2 shows that I mentioned at the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art and the show at the biennial, we began it seems like it's a 10-year process of meeting. It seems like once a month and kind of going over things. And a lot of the ideas had to be fleshed out. And she was tremendous with helping to flesh those ideas out, whether they're just logistic, like you cannot put asphalt on a floor. We need to come up with something else here to kind of, deciding what are the strengths and what pieces get in and what pieces don't. And I think it takes a long time. I think that's why retrospectives take 30 years to actually get to. It's hard enough to put together, say, the Manet show for the contemporary Austin. That's one show in a very small part of a very large museum. To then kind of have, 60 different shows is also a hard, huge undertaking. And to figure out how your work works within each other's in context of each other, but also the viewer and the ideas, and how to translate your ideas in a way to the viewer. And I don't know if I said this here, but the show is not chronological. It's meant not to be chronological. And there's no problem with shows that are chronological. But I think that it doesn't matter with my show, that the language and the things are pretty much interchangeable. And so you see early with late work is just fine. As you can see in the beginning of the show, you have the Trump wall and the peacekeeping wall. Those are new works next to some of the oldest works that I have. And the donation boxes is a relatively new piece. The directory board is the oldest piece that I have, I would say.
So was it more about flow then, as far as how the pieces fit together?
Well, that's one way to think about it, but I think the show works anyway. I think, and isn't that the fun part about openings? When we go through it as viewers, and especially if you go through it with me, just for logistics purposes, you start one place and you end another, and there's a front, middle, beginning, and end. But if you're at the opening, isn't it great when the doors are all open and you can kind of pop in and out? It's kind of like a whack-a-mole, and I also think, and I like to think of it this way because I was really, really lucky to be in New York at a very, very specific time, the 80s and the 90s, which is less than the 80s. The 80s is so very specific. New York has gone bankrupt. It's a really tough city. You have to have grit and strength to stay there in the 80s. And the artwork that came out of New York at that time is very, very special. So 90s too. But I remember going to the Whitney for the Basquiat opening, and I do believe he was alive or he had just died. I can't recall yet. But it was so spectacular because you're in the Breuer building. And I think that most shows are hung too low. I really feel this. This is my biggest thing about shows, that the paintings or the photography or the drawings, except for drawings always have to be at a very specific height. This kind of cloud things of drawings doesn't work for me, like how it is at LA MoCA with Nara. You have to see the drawings at a certain height, really to see the drawings. And but with the Basquiat show at the Breuer building, it was just so spectacular because it wasn't hung chronologically, and they were all hung terrifically high. And then down below were all the people in the paintings, and they were partying and dancing and doing all of that 80s energy right below it. And it was just the first time that you really saw it being illustrated right in front of you. And a similar thing happened too at the Museum of Modern Art with the Warhol retrospective. And I believe it was still under the Grand Hall, had the escalators. Carlo Ponti, I think, was the architect. I can't recall. I might have that incorrectly. But it had the two large escalators that crisscrossed, which is kind of when you walk in now towards the sculpture garden and you see the sculpture garden really nicely. Well, that had the escalators going there, and you're going to each floor instead of now they're kind of hidden behind to the right after you hit the sculpture garden. But it was so great because you saw all the superstars going up and down. So you see Ultraviolet and you see Candy Darling and everybody going up and down. And, Warhol was alive for his retrospective and that's in 89 or 88. I can't remember. 87. 88, I think. And it was just that zeitgeist is really something that is really hard to capture. And I think that being able to see the work not in like, okay, he made this and this begat that and that begat this and, is a nicer way to see the work. And then it also shows if the work is consistent. That was a very important thing for me, is that the work would hold up within. And, there's also this building is really made for that kind of little pockets leading one into another. Whereas if you have, and I think this is a problem for a lot of the big museums, the Museum of Modern Art has this intrinsic problem. They have to have these huge rooms. They really must. They have too many people. Even with the pandemic, they have too many people for you to truly see the artwork. And with this new hang, yes, they're bringing out a lot of the work so it isn't so chronologically white male. They're trying to show you what else was being made. South American modernism is a perfect example. They were making equally strong works as what we in our Occidental kind of history of knowing how post-war painting has developed. But the problem is you get into these rooms, they're so large that Demoiselle d'Avignon is too small. It suddenly doesn't feel as confrontational as it must have felt in, whenever it was painted in 1917 or whatever it was. I can't remember the exact year. It feels like a couch painting. And, there's so many people in that room that it doesn't have the grandiose gesture that it must have felt like. And even as it felt like before all of these different redos. And, those paintings have become small. And even like Jackson Pollock seems small. That's the whole thing, was that he was not making an easel type painting. And suddenly it seems small. So that's it's a huge problem for them, because they have to have these galleries that are so astronomically big to accommodate the amount of people that want to see the art. And that's a good thing, but it does take away from the experience of the work. And likewise with drawing, it's an exquisite Cezanne show of drawings. And I know the room is big. I know it's a big room. And yet it's the rooms that don't have those towering ceilings. And so it feels like you're being crushed. The ceilings are taller than the 16-foot ceilings here in the big room where the gates are. But you feel crushed by the way the architecture, the ceiling is dark compared to the walls, and it's pushing down on you. And you feel like, you feel like you're crouching with these these drawings. And that's a New York problem, but or a big museum problem. Is the same in LA as I described the Nara. These huge galleries where you need to be in an intimate space to see certain types of work.
I'm glad you spoke to that, because I hadn't really thought about it, but it's interesting, really, if you're thinking about the experience of the art viewer, scale matters and how it's laid out. And it's intriguing to me. But you seem like you're very in tune to not only how art is presented, but also you're a fan of architecture.
Yes. I love architecture. I wanted to be an architect, but I just couldn't do the math. And so I fell back on the visual arts, but that was my original love, was architecture. And I just adore it. And I had the lucky opportunity to be invited to be on the architectural board of the MCA here in Denver. And I went to each of the finalists' hometowns and saw their work with them one-on-one, I thought to myself, you've got the chance with all of these architects, some, already famous, others just on the crest of becoming famous. You get their ear for a day and a half, and you get to ask them anything, and you get to go around with them and see their work as they see it, and with its strengths and its foibles. And that was an invaluable experience. But architecture is a huge, huge thing for me, and I try as much as I really do try everywhere I go to see art and architecture. So, I go somewhere. Well, I haven't seen Philip Johnson's Glass House. I'll go see that. Or I haven't seen, a Neutra house in LA or something. I'll go see that. Or I am driving across country. I want to see, there's falling water for sure, but let's go check out Kentuck too. I'm in Chicago. Let me see as much Frank Lloyd Wright as I can. I really do want to see these things, and I learn as much from architecture as I can from artists. And, Judd is a perfect example of that. I mean, isn't he? Don't we learn as much from Michelangelo's architecture as we do from, his frescoes, which he didn't even want to do as much from his sculpture, Perhaps maybe he's strongest as an architect. Not that I have anything like that at all, but Judd, we learn that from in the modern sense. Marva is the perfect example of an artist taking the practice of art making and taking it to the architectural extremes. The same with the house, the building in Soho. He won some grant. I want to say it's a MacArthur, but I don't know that that's true. But it's one of those ones where you get a lot of money. And he decided to buy that building, and then all of his furniture, which is, a whole additional part of his practice. The size of the tables are based on the size of the windows in the Soho loft, and so again, he's taking from these laws, these cast iron buildings based on, and let's remember, what are the cast irons built for? They're built as factories. So how does the window system work in buildings that are built for factories? Again, we talked about elevators, but the second floor is going to have the highest clerestory. And then as the floors increase in height, so 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if it goes that high, 5 is generally the highest it goes, they'll get smaller and smaller. So he takes the one, which is the 1, 2, I believe it is, that makes the most sense for the size of the table. And then he bases the table on that. And the reason why 2 is the highest in height is, and I think it's the same here in this building, is you want the light to come in on the second floor, and on the top floors, it's pretty bright, especially here in Colorado. It's pretty bright on the top floor. You don't need to have the big windows. You need it on the second floor. So the architecture provides a lot of the clues to one as we're starting to make art and things. And Judd is a really good example of that. And Marfa is that in all of its glory. And he has his collections, he has his buildings, that he both lives in, and the buildings that were there that he gives to other artists to create their permanent pieces, Ilya Kavakov and, Andre and others, Chamberlain and others. And so it's something that I certainly take a lot of cues from, for sure. But he's not the only one, Gordon Matta Clark, and architecture, that's his whole deal, which is the opposite of architecture. He's like cutting things up, which is an architecture.
Architects tend to be like some of the most multifaceted artists. Yes,
of course. And the best ones are. I look at all of the different architects. We'll talk just now of museums. Of course, the David and Jay is wonderful here, and we have the Silvetti here at the new dam extension in the Liebeskein. And of course, the Ponte is just brilliant. But Breuer is, to me, the best contemporary art museum. I think it's true. It took a long time for everybody to learn how to use the Guggenheim. And finally, with Jenny Holzer in the 80s, they finally understood we don't need to see paintings that can't hang properly on the wall, on these walls that are round, and curved and not straight. And I think one of the best uses of the Ponte Museum in Denver, of the Libeskind wing, was when they put those Navajo rugs on those angles. I mean, putting those two together is great. Or in the case of Florence with the Yves Saint Laurent show, yes, those big shoulders deserve to be in a space that is equally darting and expressive of like edges. So it takes a while for curators and artists and even architects, because I don't know that any of these architects that I spoke of really thought about the artist. I mean, there's a lot of architects that are way better at thinking about how the art is going to think than the ones I've just mentioned. And so it takes a long time for the artists to learn how to, the curators to learn how to say, yes, putting all those truisms in a spiral would be just pretty fabulous. That's a pretty outrageous use of that spiral in the Guggenheim. But, Annabelle Seldorf is a terrific architect for creating spaces that artwork is just exquisite, that you don't notice the architecture. And she's done Marianne Boesky Gallery up in Aspen here in Colorado. That's a nice example. But she's also done, and I'm dying to see this, but there aren't public tours that I know of yet. I'm dying to see, because she did the New York Recycling Center, the big recycling center which is near Navy Yards in Brooklyn. And a lot of the recycling, they use the river, the big barges going up and down the river, which I really loved, going back to the waterways as a mode of transportation, because it's one of the most interesting ways to traverse that city is through its waterways.
I would imagine that'd be very romantic.
Yes. Well, I totally suggest it. There's a boat between Manhattan and Long Island City that anyone can take. It's just a ferry, and it's just the best way to go. And the guys at Frieze, I always kind of say it takes a Londoner to show a New Yorker the best part of their city. And when Frieze did their park up on Randall's Island, they had the boat to get to the island. And it's just like, of course, this is 100 times better than taking a taxi or a subway over to the Armory, where you get off the subway, you have to walk 10 blocks to find a place to cross the West Side Freeway, because it's got medians in the middle, and you can't get a taxi once you're there. And it's freezing cold, and maybe it snowed a foot too. So, it's really hard to get back once you're finally there. And the Londoners said, let's just get on a boat and go up here. And I thought that was kind of brilliant.
Yeah. Who were some of your favorite architects, since we're on the subject?
Oh, gosh. Well, you've named a couple of them. Breuer is right up there. Frank Lloyd Wright, of course. I've named them pretty much. David Adjaye is pretty spectacular. But Judd is pretty spectacular, too.
Neutra?
Yes, he's wonderful. Although I have to say that I'm not so versed in a lot of the California stuff as I'd like to be. I'm kind of have seen this stuff in Europe and here more, not Denver, but in New York, the spaces there. I think that the Museum of Modern Art has had talk about a bricolage. I feel sorry for that old Grand Dam. It's not as wonderful as it is all its parts. The whole, but it's a perfect example of bricolage. We like bricolage.
I want to circle back to some of your work, and I want to talk about some specific pieces. You mentioned the gates. I want to talk about that in depth, because that's one of the first things that you'll typically see when you come visit.
Well, I spoke a little bit about the tour that I did on the women's group, and often when we would stop, if I wasn't having the telephone ring or telling people about an elevator, I would read something from one of the different passages of different things that I like to read. And I was making the gates at that time, and there was this terrific bookstore in New York called Three Lives Bookstore, and it was right around the corner from where I lived in the West Village. And I hope I can find this. When we were walking around, I would be showing them my favorite gates on Broadway, and that was just one part of the tour. As I said, when we were walking around the retrospective, I was living between Soho and the West Village, and I read this essay by E.B. White, who we all kind of think of E.B. White as, a children's author, but he's also an adult author, and was featured quite often in The New Yorker alongside all the usual suspects like Benchley and Edna Ferber and Dorothy Parker. But if you ever get the opportunity to read his adult essays, he and Roald Dahl are the two that I would say, because everyone thinks of them as children's authors. And if you read their adult essays and then you read the children's stuff, it really puts a different perspective on it. And one of the things that E.B. White is one of the great naturalists, and knew about the environment and spoke about the environment very much before anyone else was even thinking about it. He's writing about it when he's visiting the World's Fair in the early part of the 20th century. But here he's writing about New York, and it's from his famous essay, Here is New York. It's about a 40-page essay. I highly recommend everyone who wants to think about New York for just an afternoon, just read it, because it's really lovely. But I'll read it, this little snippet. There are roughly 3 New Yorks. There is first the New York of the man or woman who was born here, who takes the city for granted and accepts its size and its turbulence as natural and inevitable. Second, there is the New York of the commuter, the city that is devoured by locusts each day and spat out each night. Third, there is the New York of the person who was born somewhere else and came to New York in quest of something. Commuters give the city its tidal restlessness. Natives give it a solidity and continuity, but the settlers give it its passion. And I think that kind of sums up the gates in a weird way. I wrote an essay that is followed in these newspapers, which have my attempts at Bernice Abbott on the front and back. As I said, New York in the 80s was gates. It was everywhere. Everything was gated. As I said, it had just gone through the bankruptcy. It was tough. Everywhere you went was tough. Whether you were going even on, probably even more tough was like being right next to Saks Fifth Avenue, where I was down on Broadway. There's just nobody there. They don't care. Okay, the drug dealer down the street, but that's it. There's nothing. There's the Blimpie. That's the only thing that's open at 7 a.m. to get your Coca-Cola at, and or your coffee. But it was a very specific time. And so then the gates, as I would walk from the West Village to Soho, were these things that were in between. And I saw them as something in between. I didn't see them as security, because of course there's security, but you have to look beyond what is something, yes, it's a glass of water, but what is it really? It's a vessel that's holding the water. It's the water that's inside. Where's that water? It comes from another source. These kinds of things go deeper than just what it is on its surface. And that's what I did with the gates. And that's how they became this sign of not only the time, but also of something that was in between. And as I said, they can be opened and closed. They're not the closed things that you see at night, or the thing that you see the guy out there. He's got 15 locks and a keychain of 50 different keys to open it up. These are the ones that you can open and see what's behind the gate that is the art, that is the white cube, and question it. And I also love when I make those questions happen, but someone else doesn't see that question. As I said, it first showed at the Denver Art Museum in a show curated by Peter Plagens, Marcia Tucker, and Deborah Butterfield. And I had the gates, and, it was lots of other wonderful art. The artist that comes to mind was on the cover of the catalog, Dale Chisholm. But my gate was there right by the entrance, and it was the members preview and the Bonfils galleries, which now are 2 levels. But at that time, it was just this one grand place where big artworks could be shown. And the cherry picker was still in there for the members previewer to adjust the lights. And they were lighting my gate, and they had just left the cherry picker there. And I just thought that was the grandest, to have the cherry picker in front of my work. Whereas, I think everybody else would be kind of upset. I was just like, it makes it better. I couldn't have asked for something better. So, these happy accidents are the ones that I try to find on the street at that time, and still try to find in our life as we experience things.
I also want to talk about what you see when you walk in on the 5th floor as far as these donation boxes. Will you talk about that? Because it's an actual piece. It's art. It is art. And if you didn't know, you might be confused, or you might not know that this is actually part of the work.
So I was always really interested in the prefabricated box, which we've seen in the valet parking boxes, which are holding all the keys from What's Love Got to Do with It, to the cash boxes right here for petty cash, to the boxes that hold the newspaper. So I like this repetition of the prefabricated metal box. And I was in the Dallas Museum of Art, and designed by yet another wonderful architect, Tadeo Ando, and in Texas, everything is big, right? Just ginormous. And you go in, and then there's a big stairway, and at the top of the stairway is just an astronomically huge Warhol fright wig. And it's just spectacular, and all that concrete just so like butter. And it's just so nice. And then there's this donation box, which is a really nice donation box, but it's like 3/4 the size of this coffee table if it were square. And the table is rectangle. So we're taking off the end and adding it over here to make it square. So it's just not enormous. You can barely reach the hole to put the money in. And I just thought, oh my God, it's the perfect box. This is the perfect, like when you go in the Judd building in Soho on like the 4th floor where the Flavin, maybe it's the top floor where the Flavin takes up the whole light from one corner to the other corner, catty corner piece. I think that's the top floor. There's a beautiful Ken Bell, which is the minimalist box with the plexiglass on top of it. And I'm like, it's a Ken Bell. It's just perfect. And yet it has a function. It has a real function. And people are meant to, just like with the time clock, you're meant to time in. And yet it fulfills like all the visual elements of, something that's prefabricated, something that's minimal, but it holds money. Not much, but some. And because artists don't generally like the art fairs. And I love the art fair. I love the place where all the action is happening. Usually you're really upset. Your piece is being sold. It's being valued at the most. How much is it per square inch? Almost point of reference. And it's like, okay, if we're going to talk about it, let's talk about it. Here people are paying astronomical amounts of money to come and buy and see first some kind of art, and they're seeing it's a buying frenzy. They're seeing what so-and-so is buying over there, and they can't be outdone, so they'll buy something over here. Even though if you actually go and want to buy this piece in the actual gallery, you can probably get a better deal. And we're not talking like, just little artists. We're talking major artists like Thomas Struth at Marion Goodman or something like that. These are big pieces selling for big prices that are selling for even bigger prices just because it's at a fair. And then there's also the pieces that aren't selling. And that's really sad, isn't it? Somebody who's a really big artist and they're just not selling, they don't have it that day. It's kind of like, anything else. It's just, there's this innate sadness, which is what I think why artists don't like it, about the commercialization of it. And I said, well, and then here are all these museums, and the museums are the ones that are truly the legwork that the galleries do. They're housing this stuff. And then here the galleries are coming and they're taking away all that viewership. And how can the museum get that person back in to they're competing for the same viewer and the same audience for these 4 or 5 days of a marathon, And so to me, it just seemed like such a great place to put all these boxes, which had just said, I'm about money. And, why not? And then it has much more subtle things, not just the minimalism, but what we talked about with fluxus and, recording what is given and then actually giving it to these places. So there's an actual, you're asking for something to be given and then you give it away, that isn't that what art is? It's about the act of giving, whether you know it or not, and isn't the gallery one of those last few bastions where it is free? You go to the gallery, you don't have to pay to go in. You can go in and look at some pretty amazing stuff. Gagosian, a zillion years ago, he put together an excellent, excellent show of Frank Stella black paintings over on 23rd Street, back before there was Chelsea and before Pat Hearn and Matthew Marks move over to Chelsea. SVA, which had its graduate program, was only 4 years old at the time that I went there. So it's going on its 5th and 6th year, was on 21st Street between 6th and 7th. And he's on 23rd Street between 9th and 10th or 10th and 11th. And that gallery was there for about the 2 years that I was at SVA, from 86 to 88. And for whatever reason, Gagosian had to close it. Then he moved uptown to where the Carlisle is at 76 and Madison, across from, in that big, huge gallery building. And then he had the map show. But he started very early on putting together a museum quality show for which anyone could go to. And it was free. You could go to the map show, all the Jasper John maps, and see them, or all the Frank Stella black paintings. In the case of both of those artists, that probably their strongest bodies of work within their oeuvre. And they're free. And so we're talking about what's free and what isn't, and who gives and who doesn't, and what is the protocol there, and also the protocol of touching art and actually being part of it, and those things too. And so it's called Pay What You Wish, but you must pay something. And yet you don't have to pay. You don't have to pay anything. You just have to see the picture of the Met where you do have to pay. And you can think about giving. And there you have it.
You touched on something that I really love about your work is that, and I had an epiphany the first time that I came here and saw Mid-Career Smear, that art doesn't always have to be this precious thing. Mm-hmm. It can be messy. Mm-hmm. And it can be interactive. Mm-hmm. And I got to say, since had been doing this podcast, I had not thought in those kind of terms. I think this is why I had to have somebody to share it with after I left here, and I called Wes. I was so enthralled. I was telling Haley on her podcast that we did that I felt like in the Narnia series where, they end up finding the doorway to Narnia in the back of the closet. That's what I felt like I experienced when I came here and saw Mid-Career Smear. I was confused. Mm-hmm. I got off the elevator. I walked into that. I was like, do I walk down the hall? I didn't see anybody right off. So I was, should I go in one of these rooms? So I went into that first room to the right and I walked in, I started to experience it. And then I was like, am I doing this right? Is there a right way to do this? Is it, and so I walked out probably 2 or 3 times going, all right, what am I doing? Where am I at? And I love that because it made me you made me think. That to me is the best art when it actually, and I didn't even know the idea behind. I mean, Haley took about half an hour or so and kind of explained some of the work, but I really still hadn't wrapped my head around it, but I still had this takeaway after that experience. Well,
as I said, when we were talking about one little piggy eats roast beef, one little piggy has none, ate roast beef. I did relational aesthetics things at the time that a lot of the artists who are considered among that group. It happens with Gordon Matta Clark. It happens with Daniel Spory. Even Sandy Skoglund, people with food and art that have been happening a long time. Gordon Matta Clark creates the whole, beyond saving Soho, he created a co-op for food called Food. And because there was no restaurants in Soho, Mezzogiorno had not yet happened, which we saw in the mid-career smear. So it was a co-op. So people went there and you worked a few hours a month and you got to come there and have your coffee or your tea, and then he would curate nights where people would come and do a performance with food. And one night they did something like this. Everyone had meat. So if you had chicken, you had chicken bones. And if you had steak, you had steak bones. Took all the meat after you'd eaten it. They put it in a big pot. They boiled all the meat off of the bones. They took the bones. They had a jeweler's drill there and they drilled holes in it and you wore home the bones that you ate it. And so there's a long history of that. I've just given contemporary art in the contemporary sense since the 60s. But it's, you think of all the different kinds of funny desserts that you have, those are, I'm thinking of, so there's a cream puff in France and it comes with chocolate filling, it comes with cream filling, or it comes with the brown filling, which is kind of like a caramel, like a dulce de leche, but not so thick. And it's a big cream puff like this. And then it has a little tiny one on the top and it's called La Religieuse. And why is it called that? It's the Pope's hat, And, there's the one that's the boob, there's all these, if you think about food, there's lots of ways that it happens. I mean, there's the surrealist one. I think it's Merit Oppenheim, where she lays the naked woman down on the table and there's all the food. It's like Archimbaldo covered with oysters and octopus and all kinds of meat and everything. And people just eat off this woman who's alive. There's lots of people that are doing performance art with food long before the relational aesthetics. And it's not just with food, but food is an obvious one. So performance, and it's funny because I think that Denver has a very interesting relationship, and a curator ought to come to Denver and do a show just on that because it seems to really touch people here mentally and conceptually in a way that it is I don't know, it's just not, they really enjoy being part of it here as an audience. Not that they don't enjoy it other places, but they really like it here. And they should be exposed to all of it, and the history of it, because there's a long, long history of it. And it's not just an art, it's how to participate in anything, whether it's a parade even, anything where the audience is just as much a part of it as what they do really well with the Broncos. There you go, stamp. That's like a great performance piece is, the stamping on the stadium, and people from Colorado expect it, Mile High Stadium. They don't do that in other stadiums, and I remember my dad was at the World Series between San Francisco and Oakland in the late 80s, right as the wall was coming down, and the earthquake hit, and everybody he thought from Denver, he was with a bunch of people from Denver. They all thought people were just doing this in the stadium. They didn't realize it was an earthquake. And everybody's running onto the field, and they're like, it's just people stomping their feet, because that's something that we experience here in Denver, whether it's through art or other things, and so it has a really nice relationship to relational aesthetics, and they should have an exhibition which highlights that. This has a little bit, there is some, but I do think that the Narnia thing is a really apt metaphor, because I too love that moment when you get to Narnia, and the door is a pretty powerful place, and it's the back of the wardrobe in C.S. Lewis's wonderful series. I think that there should be more of it in Denver. It's ripe for it, and there's a special relationship that this city has for recognizing it, which I don't know why, but it's there.
It's interesting. And it's nice to hear your perspective, because you travel a fair amount and you spend time in different places. So it's nice to hear somebody's perspective that it spends time in New York, and you spend time in Austin too. Is that correct?
Sure. I have the lucky chance to be in Austin, which is a swell city, by the way. But and Austin and Denver are interesting because there are cities that are growing. When I grew up in Denver, there was the Denver Public Library and the Denver Art Museum, and the Tattered Cover, as I said. These were the places that I went to kind of make sense of what I was trying to find. Now Denver has a really actually exciting art scene that is just bubbling on the surface, and lots of new things happening. Haley has this great fair, but just lots of really interesting thing. Her fair it started out kind of as a book science zine kind of fair, and then has kind of evolved into all different kinds of things. And it's in a gymnasium of a rec center, so kind of like the Y or something like that. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm really excited. And I just think that it's a city that's ripe for doing lots of interesting things, and there's a lot of young people moving here, so that makes it happening. I say this a lot. Denver is 10 years behind Miami when Miami started having Art Basel. We don't have something like Art Basel, which is going to, by its mere presence, start to make people more interested in arts, more interested in an art community, and more interested in making a collecting base. However, let's think about it in a different way. Miami didn't have an encyclopedic museum at all. And their museum, designed by Herzog and de Meuron, fabulous architects, has barely anything in it. And, it's a fabulous museum, but they don't have the huge content that Denver has, and now 3 buildings. So they're in different places, but it had Art Basel, and Art Basel created an environment in where art was not just, art, that. Denver is a city that Austin is a music city. People go there for music, and that is kind of also the music city has also, and the weather, and the same with Denver, creates a huge outdoor community for exercise and things like that. That is not intrinsic in New York as much. If you want to exercise in New York, you belong really to a gym. There's not that much of there are the crazy people, like Fred Tomaselli is one of them. He likes to do outlandish kayaking in New York. And I don't know if he's done it, but there was talk at one point, because Canal Street truly is a canal. And underneath the street, you can, if you're very, very brave, kayak from the Hudson to the east.
Wow.
And and people do it. But my point is that Denver is now in the last 10 years, and Austin is a little bit behind Denver in arts in that sense, but Texas is not. Texas has a huge supporting art community. I mean, Houston, just go to Dallas to be outdone by Dallas. Oh, go to Fort Worth. It's just one museum after another. And they'll buy Michelangelo out from under the Met. You know, Texas has a wonderful community for art. And they were very supportive as a patronage community towards me as an artist, giving me the wonderful Art Pace experience, which is huge, 3-month residency for an artist to do whatever you want. And they let me do 2 pieces, not just one. And that was just an experience of a lifetime. I remember driving back from San Antonio to Austin. I thought to myself, it doesn't get better than this. And then here comes this bus of a lady roller derby driving right next to us. They were going to Oklahoma, and they just, Stephen Evans was the curator of the Linda Pace Foundation at the time. And he had just taken us the night before to the ladies roller derby in a small high school gym or grade school gym where the stands were just fold up chairs, you know, and if they crash, you better get out of the way. There's nothing in between you and those girls. But, you know, Austin is a music city. Denver is an exercise city. Austin is also an exercise city, and they're just getting their art legs. But in the last 10 years, 15 years in Colorado, we've had, I think, 7 new institutions. Let's count them. We had the Liebsky, now the C. Welcome Center, Ponte redone, MCA Denver, Clifford Still, the new Kirkland, Aspen Art Museum. The University of Colorado has a new building. I think they have one in Colorado Springs, although I've not seen their new building. Something is new down there, but I haven't been to it. So, you know, we're really getting the legs for true museum viewing, and behind that come the smaller galleries and then maybe some fairs. Whereas in Art Basel, it was the fair first, second biggest fair in the world, biggest American fair that created all those other communities. So it worked the opposite. I kind of say that rap's a little like that. Rap, you know, the whole essence of rap is they start from the source, and then they go back and they start to learn jazz, and then they start to learn all the rap artists. It doesn't matter who it is, you know, then they learn, you know, some of the, you know, great composers of, you know, more traditional music, Occidental music. They learn African music, but they start with what's street, you know, on the street. And then they go back to whatever historical thing. They even go back, you know, just a few years, you know, they're riffing. Miami was that way. They start just there, and then they go back. Whereas we've kind of got the history. You know, Denver Art Museum starts since, God, I should know this. I've been to a bunch of the openings there, but it's late 1800s, the first museum that they had. So it's got a long history as an encyclopedic museum and a lot of objects. And now we have the space to see it. So I think that's good for Denver and Colorado in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Colorado has always had a vibrant art history. I mean,
yes.
there's always been people that have flocked here from all over to come and do art. And like you said, we have some really significant institutions here in Denver. And like you said, it's the art community, the art scene is definitely like taken off here in Denver.
For sure. And well, right there in front of you, just in front of that flash art diary, there's Michael Kimmelman, Accidental Masterpieces. And he talks about the idea of the pilgrimage. And it isn't the West that, even from the days of the Louisiana Purchase. And you can see it in this whole map installation that they have over now at the Denver Art Museum, how the United States as a landmass, and not just the United States, but North America, South America, how the pilgrimage starts, you know, first from European settlements and then also from the West, through Asia and then with our own indigenous populations, both the North and South. And so from the coast, you have the pilgrimages, and obviously Colorado would be one of those pilgrimages. Texas wouldn't be a natural one, but they make it so, with that Texas spirit. Bad or good, they're the best. They let you know. Whereas Colorado is a much more obvious natural pilgrimage destination. But it's been happening for hundreds of years. And we might, I always say, embrace, and this is not cheesy, but I always say embrace the cheese in the sense that, okay, you come into this building, I call it Dragnet meets Empire State Building because, the painted numbers on the door. And you could say, oh man, it's got all these odd shelves and there's, drop ceilings here and no drop ceilings there. And, nothing is a true square or, perfect. And I say, embrace the cheese, embrace what it is. Don't go about thinking knocking down all these walls. They're great. It's really lovely. Embrace it. It doesn't always have to be about the biggest car on the lot, Yeah. It can be about embracing whatever's there.
I want to talk about one more piece. And as you're listening to this podcast, you might hear that clicking here and there. That's a time clock that you're hearing. And Devon, this is an early piece, you said. Talk about the thought behind this and where it was first shown.
Okay, there it goes on cue. So I was making these gates, and again, I told you I loved catalogs. Well, the U-Line catalog is just like the Bible, and it's better. I mean, I'm a little bit too young for the Sears catalog, but I imagine it's kind of like the Sears catalog. You get it, and you're just looking through it like, what cool things could there be? And so I had my U-Line catalog. Again, this is before anyone really had a computer. I had a computer because at Brown, Steve Jobs did this funny thing with about 10 schools, and Brown happened to be one of them, that he would sell you the very first Mac for $500. And you got a Mac, you got a printer, and you got a mouse. And it was all in one box. And my dad, I'm picking it up wherever it is. And the one-way streets are all confusing in Providence. And I've got this big box, which is way too heavy to carry and bulky too for somebody of my strength. And we can see each other, but he can't, he's trying to figure out how to get there because it's all these one-way streets. And I got the very first Mac. So I have a computer. It's not like there's no computer, but there's no internet. And in the art world, there's only 5 people that have a computer. There's Kenny Goldsmith, who's the poet laureate for the MoMA and was the person, Nina Borgman and Kenny Goldsmith designed the very first Zing magazine website, and which was hosted by The Thing. So there's Kenny Goldsmith. There's Wolfgang Stahler, who designs The Thing, which is a platform or a server for art. And there's me. And then Reiner Ganal knows how to use a computer. He doesn't have one, but he knows how to use it. And it's part of his artwork at the time. Kenny Schachter knows how to use one, but doesn't have one. And so I had a computer, and we're all doing it on that very old Mac. And then I got a slightly better one. And I sold my very old Mac, which I just want to kill myself, for $120 in $10 installments to Aaron Nomenworth. That was just terrible because I think I got like maybe half of the installments and could have the original Mac right now. And unfortunately, that's not the case. But at any rate, I'm looking through this one U-Line catalog that I had. And as I said, how did artists get to have a show, be in a group show? And I didn't really know anyone. A lot of the artists that were my contemporaries, they were kind of a group. There was a whole group from Yale, and there was a whole group from RISD, and they all hung together. And those groups are really powerful as a group because, one person gets a studio visit, as I mentioned, the Rauschenberg John story. So do all the others eventually. Well, I didn't have anybody because my group from SVA was, for better or worse, not such a tight-knit group. And SVA was different in the sense that at SVA, at Yale and RISD, you really chose, I'm going to be a photographer, I'm going to be a painter, I'm going to be a sculptor, and you're that. And you can't go do photography if you're a sculptor, or if you're ceramics, you can't make paintings or drawings. You are in a school. And at SVA, they're all together. So it was really good in that sense because there's a lot of cross-pollination going. But there's no true group like there is at these other schools. So I'm pretty much by myself. But I knew that at Stuck's, one Wednesday every month, I think it was the 3rd, you could bring your slides because that's what you had, and take them and sit like you're waiting, sit on the floor and wait to have your slides reviewed by the gallerist, who was Stephen Stucks. He's no longer among us. He was a very important gallerist at the time. More recently, less important, but at the time, really important. And he had this glass office in the middle of his gallery, glass all the way around, like Philip Johnson's glass house, but just an office. Had this big Chippendale chair. When it's your turn, he was sitting in a Chippendale chair and he'd look at your slides. And if you liked the slides, he'd have a studio visit with you. And so I'm looking through the U line, trying to find some pieces because I know he's not going to put the gates up because I'm making these gates and they're just too big, and they are the scale of the street. That's very important. They're not the scale of the galleries. And later, this becomes an issue, a very funny issue, but not funny enough. But that's another story, which I'll tell in a second. But so he sees my slides, and so I get the studio visit, and I had ordered these racks from Uline in the clock. And if he likes something well enough, then he invites you into a group show in summer or winter. And so he liked mine well enough. And so my takes a licking, keeps on ticking, which is the time clock, got to be in the Stuck's group show, which was also in a show with Doug Aiken. And he had a funny piece. It was cast. It was a pew. It's not a pew. I should know this, but I'm not religious enough. The thing that you kneel on in a church, kneeling pad. I don't know.
Sure.
Okay. What?
It's just called a kneeler.
A kneeler.
Okay.
Okay. He had that, but it was cast in caulking, so it was really flexible and sagging in the middle. And it's not indicative of any of his video work, which is what he's known for. And then similarly, Cajole, we're right next to each other again. And I had sent slides into the New Museum show. So that's how you get a show, is you send your slides in. And I had sent it into New Museum, and I told him to send it in. But neither of us really had a group. But that's how that worked. And so Stephen Stucks liked the work, and he allowed me to be in his group show. And that was really exciting because all the other guys were getting these shows based on, each other, and they're kind of moving through as a group. Whereas I had to fight for my right to party, Beastie Boys style. And they were big at that time too.
Oh.
A very good part of New York. I had another story that I was about to tell you, but I lost it now. Of that time period in New York, because it's a really fun time period. Oh well.
It'll come back to you.
After the podcast.
Yeah. Tonight when you're falling asleep to Magnum PI.
Yeah, exactly. It comes on at 1 to 3. Actually 4.
Are you a night owl?
Well, do you want to hear the TV schedule?
Sure.
Okay, so let's start with Magnum. Magnum comes on at 1. There's 3 episodes. Then comes Diagnosis Murder, which is the Dean Hargo vehicle for Dick Van Dyke. It's kind of etsy-ketsy, which means comme ci, comme ça in Greek. So I'll either stick with that or switch over to another channel, which has Murder, She Wrote. So I'll watch Murder, She Wrote usually. And there's a couple episodes of Murder, She Wrote, and then that'll segue into $6 Million Man. If I want 2 episodes of $6 Million Man, I stick with that. But I can switch to another channel, which has at 8 a.m. Perry Mason. Perry Mason's 8 to 9. 8 to 9. At 9, I switch over to Family Affair, which is a double feature. Then it'll go to McHale's Navy. Then it'll go to I Dream of Jeannie. I might switch it all, though, over to Andrea Mitchell Reports, which is on at 10. And so after I Dream of Jeannie is Bewitched, which I'm not so crazy about, except for the color is so good in Bewitched. And Endora is just classic. And then after Bewitched is a double feature of That Girl, which is fabulous. Although if you don't like Bewitched, you can switch over to another channel, and there's a double feature of Mary Tyler Moore, which is exquisite. But we all think that Girl is after Mary Tyler Moore. In fact, That Girl happens before. She's truly 60s, and Mary is 70s. Then after Mary, there's Bob Newhart. So you got to play which one you want to watch there, because it's a really good Bob Newhart's, not the second Bob Newhart show. Then at 2:00, I'll watch Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace, and she's on for 2 hours. Then I really do switch to heavy news, and it's mostly MSNBC. So after that, I'll watch Ari Melber, which I love him because he makes all the pop culture references with like all the rap artists, and it's like really good. You know, he talks about politics in terms of rap lyrics, you know, which is really good. And then he tries to get these guys that know nothing about rap lyrics to kind of like fall for it, you know, and it's really good. Then there's Joy Reid. I like her pretty well. I used to like her better, but she's from here. So that's kind of interesting when she talks about Colorado. And then after that, I don't really like, and that guy went to Brown. I can't think of his last name. Chris something, or the young guy. And then comes Rachel Maddow. And then Lawrence O'Donnell, and then Brian Williams. And then if you miss that because you went to dinner, it's all on again. And then you wait till 10:00 and Murder, She Wrote's happen. It's all over again. There's Johnny at 10 too. So you can watch Johnny, and Ed Sullivan and Dick Cavett are kind of in those nighttime slots. And then at 10, Murder, She Wrote comes on again, and Perry Mason on again, although they're not the same episodes, which is good. And then you just wait up for that 1:00 witching hour.
So that is amazing. No. So other than those slight deviations, depending on what episode and what you're feeling that day.
Yeah. Also, it depends if it's a good episode and I've seen it, or if it's like an Etsy Ketsy episode and I've seen it, you know, because there are really, really good episodes of all of these. And then, you know, Magnum's birthday is always a drag. You're never in a Magnum birthday. Okay. Because he's always like, it's always the 4th of July that his dad died or something. And he's either like trying to escape a shark, and it's just Magnum swimming forever until, you know, the guys rescue him, or he's like climbing up a mountain and gets trapped under an airplane, you know, and is like talking the whole time to the spider in the web. It's kind of like E.B. White speaking of, you know, some pig, you know, but so you're never in any of those. But those are kind of a drag. I don't like Magnum's birthday that much. I like it. But Simon and Simon and Magnum are head to head, because Simon and Simon is ABC and Magnum is either CBS or NBC. I think CBS. But they're head to head. But then Simon and Simon do guest star on Magnum, or the other way around. I think it's Simon and Simon on Magnum.
I think you're right.
And that is quite good. But there used to be some channels that are no longer, and one of them was the soap channel, which was really good because you'd get Knots Landing and Dynasty and Dallas and all of that. And even, the true soaps, the daytime soaps, of which I think only GH is still playing. Although driving back I had a show in LA at the Foyer, and it was a really great show. It was the MTV altarpiece, which I made at Brown, and it's an altarpiece to MTV. We were driving back, and I saw the hospital that is GH Hospital, and it's on the way to Vegas. You're not in downtown LA or anywhere near, La Brea and all that, where the museums are, like LA Mocha. And you're well on your way to Vegas. And I'm like, oh my God, GH.
That's awesome.
It was fun.
So do you sleep at all?
I sleep a lot, but I'm a napper. I'm a good napper.
Oh, okay.
Yesterday, I don't like doing this though, because I hate sleeping in that 6 to 8 period, because then you might not be able to go to sleep later.
Yeah, you're up all night, right?
Yeah, I try to do the nap more in the middle of the day. But that solitaire on the phone makes it easy to fall asleep too. It just hits you like that.
Time management, you seem like you're pretty good at it.
No.
You're a multitasker.
Oh, I had a really, really good word. Let's see if I can find it. I love Word of the Day. But this was on Departure magazine, which is published or used to be published by Condé Nast. It's a travel magazine, and it gives you good ideas. And I always thought, I had a roommate, and he always got travel magazines. I'm like, who the hell gets a travel magazine? And he's like, no. And he had like ski magazine, hiking magazine, travel. I don't know. All these. I'm like, why the hell do you get these? Why don't you just go do it? Why do you want to read about it? I want to read where to go. That's what he told me. I thought it was a really weird thing to subscribe to. But anyways, so Undefinables is a new section of Departures magazine. Universally relatable words from languages around the world. In Swedish, tidsoptimus literally means a time optimist, someone who is constantly late because they think they have more time than they actually do. Or as Nas would say, always on time, never on schedule. Or is it the other way around? Always on schedule, never on time. That's from Ari Melber.
Oh, that would be me, huh, Wes?
Yes. Yes.
You didn't even hesitate.
No.
So what is obviously TV is playing in the background
yes.
all the time.
I can't believe I don't have it on here. It's driving me nuts, by the way.
Is it really?
Yes. I love background noise, but luckily we have the clock to give us bring us back to earth.
Right. So you have this playing in the background while you're doing multiple other things.
Yes. It doesn't bother me.
Not at all.
Not at all.
See, and this is what amazes me, how as far as how people are able to operate and how their brains work. I'm always curious.
Well, they should be listening to their podcast while they're doing whatever it is that they're doing in their life. That's what I think I got from my fella's description of what a podcast was 30 minutes before I met you guys. I was like, okay, everybody's listening to podcasts while they're checking their emails and, that kind of thing. Mine is just old school, so it's TV. So I'm watching, the episode of, Family Affair, because I haven't seen them in so long. I'm probably going to tune in for what Mr. French is up to.
There you go.
But lots of these I've seen so many times I know it's coming. So I don't have to pay that much attention. But there's some really interesting things that happen in TV. Like if you go towards, say, like Rockford, which unfortunately isn't on currently in my time zone right now in Denver. But Rockford, you do have to watch because there's so many car chases that you don't know what's going on unless you're actually watching the TV, which is the beauty of MTV, because you could have it on and you could do other things. But a friend of mine sent me this, which is just brilliant. It's the first 2 hours of MTV, the very first 2 hours. And somehow then it became something that people sent around. Although I sent it to everybody I knew, and I sent it as a forwarded message. And I'm like, I can't believe that not one of these people like responded. And one of my friends told me, well, it's because it was buried in the forward. And so I was just like, whatever. And then Artforum put it on like their choices the first 2 hours, and then people are sending it to me, and I'm like, I sent this to you 2 months ago without Artforum. But the thing that's so incredible about how TV changed from like that time period of Rockford or say Dynasty, where it's a plot driven thing, and in Dynasty all the characters, it's like Peter and the Wolf, every character has a song, a part of the melody. So when it's Blake, it's da 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 da, and then here comes Crystal, da 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 da, and then like Fallon, it's like a different instrument. It'll be the triangle. So you know without even watching which character is on. And then with Rockford, you know, you really do have to watch it because they're not giving you any oral, and by that I mean listening cues to what's going on. And Rockford, of course, has the answering machine. Actually, Rockford is one of the songs that you hear when you go on the choice of the music. I think it's towards the end with the answering. It should be for the answering machine, but I know that one's The Phone's Off the Hook, But You're Not by X. But with TV, so with MTV, the beauty of it is that you can do other things while watching it. But the other beauty of it is, and when you watch those first 2 hours, the song is just that small enough amount of time that you're willing to listen. You know, you'll watch it to see what's the realest thing they're going to do now, you know, and it's truly like a lesson in surrealism, you know, because they do, you know, the teacups, you know, it's a, you know, Tom Petty, I think, Alice in Wonderland, and every kind of psychedelic thing that you can think of, it just comes straight from there. And, but it's that 3 to 4 minute period you're willing to, I can watch for 3 or 4 minutes and then to see what the next one is before I'm going to do the next thing. And they really get you that way. Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of it. And of course it no longer exists because thanks to MTV, we have reality TV because of Real World. And, that first season was filmed right across from where I lived on Broadway in New York. And I would see them, like the two of the characters, 2 girls in that first group adopted a dog and they didn't know how to take care of the dog. And they're running around Soho. There's nobody in Soho. And they got the cameras following them. And it was funny because that was right up the street. But MTV really caught you that way. And then the other thing that was happening right at that time in the mid 80s was like Jimmy Swaggart and Tammy Faye and all of that, because the housewife could do her ironing and do her cooking and cleaning and have it on. And it's not plot driven. You know, and then we have the space shuttle explosion, and that begins 24-hour cycle of news TV, and the Iranian crisis with Ted Koppel, and that's late 70s. So that starts, you know, whatever that was called, Ted Koppel. It has a name, and now it escapes me. But his show that came on at 11 o'clock every night here in Denver, and it was on the Iranian crisis, the hostage situation. Nightline.
Yes.
Nightline. And that starts 24-hour news cycle. And then our first president, because of 24-hour news cycle and MTV, is Clinton. And that's TV changing the outcome in the way that the Kennedy outcome was changed with Nixon. with that debate being televised,
Right.
like how TV changes. And I was talking with a really good friend of mine, and was an art director at Condé Nast, which is changing completely because, of course, magazines no longer exist as we typically know them. And we were talking about it, and we're at this very peculiar place with the printed media. In the last, 30 years, we've gone from, just printed media and the introduction of television as a visual platform and news media to now, email and now text, podcasts, all these different ways of communicating the word, how words are communicated, and how just even when we were talking about the printed word, well, there were the Bibles that were just for the very wealthy, that were illuminated and just beautifully handwritten, but those were for very few people. And then when Gutenberg comes along, but all of those transformations, those take hundreds of years. So it goes from spoken to written, and how long that transformation takes, yes, okay, Gutenberg, the printing press changes, but it doesn't change it that quickly.
Right.
It takes a few hundred years. 30 years, we've got all these different ways of communicating, and how the written word has changed our way of communication. And that's a very interesting thing, and what it's maybe doing to our brains, or the way we think and how we process information, and how adaptable, in fact, that the brain is. Mm-hmm. That when you think about it, it's pretty scary. Scarier than anything Hollywood can come up with.
Right.
Yeah, I'm always curious as far as how we've evolved, and we have all these ways of communicating now, but yet we seem like we're terrible at communicating.
Yeah.
Well, we're terrible at listening. We don't hear what the other one's saying. We're always preparing for a response. And so we're thinking about the response and not listening to what the person's saying. I mean, that's part of it. Yeah, we're all egocentric. We want to hear ourselves talk.
Or if you're on an answering machine, you don't want to hear yourself talk.
Right. You grew up with TV, you love watching it still. A lot of these older programs. Is that nostalgia?
No.
Okay.
I do love nostalgia.
Do you?
Who doesn't? But I have to say that the programming, I do love Bravo. Give me a Vanderpump Rules any day. How can Stasi? I mean, she's just brilliant. You can't come up with a better character. The self-absorption between Jax and Stasi, I mean, it's better than Shakespeare. I mean, it just really is. And you just can't believe it. But, for most part, I think that there is a dearth of programming. Although, there are great things. I just watched, binge watched Mayor of Easttown, which, she won the Emmy for, Kate Winslet. It was great. Give me a mystery. I love it. On Delta, I watched the whole Nicole Kidman one with Hugh Grant, but I was so excited to fly the next time I flew on Delta, and they stopped, and I have yet to see the fifth one, which is where everything concludes. I'm just like, oh God, how can, and of course The Crown, British royalty, what American doesn't want to learn about that, So I love, the smarter television programming, but I don't think that the networks as we knew them growing up, the CBS, the NBC, ABC, are doing their part. There was just a thing that said, they said on some news channel that Disney's going to be the most streamed TV channel, and it's going to beat Netflix in they had some time period. I don't remember what it was, but much sooner than you think. And that was surprising, the resiliency of Disney, and yet again, the brilliance of Steve Jobs.
New Magazine is our media sponsor for the Tenet podcast. That's NUE. You can follow both the national and the Denver edition of New Magazine on Instagram. The national edition can be found at new_magazine and the Denver edition at new_Denver_magazine. Look to New for compelling stories from the world of art and fashion. Thanks for listening.
I'm Devon Dikeou, and you're listening to the Tenet Podcast.
I want to talk a little bit about Zing Magazine now.
Okay.
You talked about the seed of how it started. All these artists that you featured, or at least in the beginning, were these people that you're already interacting with via, the
women's group.
The women's group. And
You started to meet. So one of the things you do as a young artist, which is very important, and I teach a mentor class, mostly at the School of Visual Arts photography department. But I always say to them, this is the time. You don't know anybody. Nobody knows you. Go to every single opening you can. Try to hang with as many different groups. Trade studio visits with as many different artists as you can. Even if you think that you don't like their work or they won't like your work, do it anyways, because it's a really good way to network. Because when you're my age, you really don't want to go to openings because you're approached by people that you don't want to talk to, whether they're friends or foes, or young people that, may feel like they want to talk to you and you just don't really feel like talking to somebody. I find that the art world, no matter where it is a kind of finite number of people. Cindy Sherman, Jenny Holzer, they're not going to openings. You're not going to meet them at an opening. They've gone beyond the openings. They were going to openings when they're your young age, and they're out there meeting each other and seeing each other in the context of seeing shows and things like that. And that's the one thing that SVA had over Yale and over RISD and Chicago Art Institute, or even the California schools. You have New York. And I always say that New York is the best teacher. You mess up on that measurement of your stretcher, there's not a saw there like at Yale or at RISD for you to cut that extra 1/4 inch off so that your stretcher is perfectly square. No. You got to take the elevator down, walk down 3 blocks to the place, wait in line, and see if the guy is kind enough to cut your thing 1/4 inch for you, or 1/8 of an inch, to make it square. And that he cuts it straight, because there's a huge chance he's not going to cut it straight. So in that sense, New York teaches you to be the best that you can be, and it shows you everything if you're willing to do the work. And RISD or Yale, those kids would have to take a weekend and come down to New York and maybe see 1/10 of what I saw every week. And so I really got that out of SVA and was very lucky that way. And you also had big names. They weren't necessarily great teachers. And I think that Yale and RISD tended to have better teachers, and you had a better passport into the art world. Whereas SVA, it was a 4-year program when I went there. It doesn't have that. Maybe it does now. But of course, it did have great alumni like Keith Haring and Kenny Scharf, and now Elizabeth Payton and Gary Simmons and other big names. There's other ones. But it was a very young program when I went there. But New York was a very old lady teaching you the ropes. Zing Magazine came out of you're showing with different people. There are these fairs. I'm a student of Warhol, and Warhol started Interview Magazine because he wanted to go to all the movies. And there's a great thing called the Press Pass, and that gets you in. And you guys, if you don't have it, get it now and make it look as official as you can, and you can get into it. Only museum that's ever turned Zing Magazine down is the Louvre. And, well, I don't mind giving them some money. But, the magazine came out of, one night I wasn't in the Armory show, which used to be called the Gramercy, and it was in the Gramercy Park Hotel, and I wasn't in that show, and all my friends were in it. And I thought, well, what can you do? You can become part of the press. You can get in because you'll have the press pass. You can meet all the gallerists because you're the press. And you're not just going up as an artist. Hi, I'm an artist. Please show my work. You're coming at them from a different angle, and that gives you some power. And so I was looking at it, as we said from the very beginning, from a different position. And so I went down to this bar that was on the corner of Grand and West Broadway. And now I can't even recall the name of it, but they did have these lovely little steak bites. And I had a beer, and I said, well, I'm going to create a magazine. And I loved Harper's, not Bazaar, the fashion magazine, but Harper's Monthly, which is kind of more of a news magazine, one of the oldest magazines of that is still surviving in the United States. And they had a lot of different things. They had this thing called readings, where they would take things from other magazines and put them in the magazine. And I loved that. And I loved, they had these round tables, and I thought that's really, really cool. And I loved Art Forum's Artist Project. So my idea was to have, all different kinds of people, like somebody from, a mathematician, an artist, a dancer, a writer, a poet. You got to have the poets. And put them all together in a curated magazine. And my idea is that they'd invite people. But everybody, the minute you do that, they all want to be artists. And so it became a lot of mathematicians' art projects and things like that, or fashion artists' art projects, which is fine. And then, each issue changed and transformed itself, but that was the original idea. Originally, it was long before we could do podcasts or more. It would have, Zoom calls would have been what it was, because I really wanted all the curators to be able to all talk with one another and talk about each other's projects. And the internet had really just started. I had an America Online account, Antigone at AOL.com. And I got some of the first articles sent to me via email of Zing Magazine, like via AOL. And that was just pretty incredible. And Zing Magazine, actually, we have the table that it was created on. It's an old-fashioned table from like the 40s or the 50s. It's on wheels. It's like that prefabricated metal. That's it. In fact, there it is.
It's like an old typing table.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. At the Good Call Haley, I forgot where that was. So it was created on a laptop. And as I said, I was given about $1,300, and I thought, well, I can make an issue of a magazine on this. I got everybody together, and I, at the bar, had come up with the name of Zing Magazine. And how I came up about it was, I said, it's going to be a curatorial crossing, because I'm going to call everybody a curator, whether they're a mathematician, whether they're a poet. They're the curator of their section. And there were these, my fella at the time was French, and they kept saying, whenever there was driving, there would be a pedestrian crossing or a truck crossing or railroad crossing. And there was a duck crossing, and all of these zings. What are these zings? And I'm like, they're crossings. And then I'm like, a curatorial crossing, Zing Magazine. So I had all these different people over. It was mostly guys. There were only a few women. Natalie Rivera was one of them. Amy Silman was one of them. But there weren't many women, and mostly men. Kenny Schachter was there. Gregory Volk was there. Mike Ballou was there. And I said, I want to start a magazine, and I'm going to invite a whole bunch of people to do things. And there's going to be reviews in the back, because you always need reviews, because remember, that's your power, is to review something. So that's how Zing Magazine started. And then at issue 20, I decided no more reviews, because we came out irregularly enough. And the review as kind of anything was just not really a viable platform any longer. So that's how it started. Also, Flair magazine, that was a huge influence. Fleur Coles, was a fashion. I love fashion. It's one of my favorite things. And she started a fashion magazine, and she did all these fabulous die cuts and things like that, and had really fabulous people like She had the travel diaries of Jackie Kennedy and Lee Radziwill, their first trip to Europe, or, just these wonderful things. And so she was a huge influence, her magazine. But Condé Nast and Bazaar, which is not a Condé Nast title, put her out of business. They made sure that nobody would advertise with her. And her archive is at the Harry Ransom Center in the University of Texas. And she was married, I forget the gentleman's name, but he had Look magazine, which is, one of the, Life and Look. They were the
biggies.
Yeah. And it's so important. Again, that coming home from school at the end of the day to see those catalogs and those magazines, National Geographic, Time, and Life were what we had. And of course, TV Guide and Reader's Digest.
So how has the magazine, outside of no longer having reviews, how has it changed over the years, or has
Well,
it?
it never got the Zoom call in there. That was just never a viability until probably just now, and actually might change. We were the very first magazine, one of them, long before Art Forum or any other of the art magazines, to have a website. And that's thanks to this small group of people that were on the computers. Nina Borgman was working at ArtNet. So there was ArtNet, there was The Thing, and there was about 5 artists that worked at these places that started the art world's digital platform as we know it. And that was in the early 90s. So it hasn't really changed. In fact, it stays pretty much the same, just the players. Games the same, just players are different. And the next issue has some really fun projects coming in. We look forward to coming out. I won't spoil any of it by telling you them. You'll have to wait around a little more.
So how's it paid? How do you pay for it?
I save money until we get enough to print. Printing has gone from an astronomical cost to something that's very viable. And for even just individuals, there's lots of ways to print now. Paper has gone down. It used to be in the late 90s super expensive. We would spend an astronomical amount of money on printing, and now we don't spend nearly that.
See, I would have thought it was the other way around.
It isn't any longer. That has helped us. Things changed a lot with the EU. I'm sure they'll change again now that it'll be a whole nother can of worms that we'll have to deal with distribution, which is the most important thing that nobody wants to deal with. But it is the most important thing. When the EU opened up, it was wonderful because we were able to print in Europe, and then that meant we could ship within the EU relatively cheaply. And that was a huge help to the success of the magazines. Of course, fairs always help. And we would go with Zing Magazine to the fairs, but they help only in name recognition. They don't help in sales because everyone's coming to an art fair to look at art. The last thing they want is something that weighs 5 pounds to carry around to the fair. And we'd find our beautiful magazines in the next trash bin. And so we stopped giving them out. You can't viably sell at fairs unless it is a book fair and people are coming with the knowledge that they're coming to carry books around, and they pick and choose what they want to carry. We found that the one thing we could sell that made a lot of money were Zing Magazine bags, which started our collaboration with the fashion bag designer, Matt Murphy. And, he designed the first bag that we did, which came out in issue 18. So you could put the long Mac in it and you could put a Zing Magazine in it. And then the second bag that he did was for the people that were riding skateboards and bikes all around the city, which was a bag. I called it the everything bag, which used to be on TV. My grandmother would probably have bought one. A place for your comb, a place for your change bag, a place for this, a place for that. Your lipstick over here, your glasses over there. Well, this was like a really chic everything bag that you could wear while skateboarding. And, so you had free movement, biking and skating.
Right on.
So no advertising.
There is advertising.
Oh, there is. Okay.
Helmut Lang was a big advertiser when he was a big, and they're almost like patrons. And we saw the advertising as kind of patronage. A lot of the galleries, Trisha Collins, I told you I worked for Collins and Milazzo, and then they broke up as a curatorial team, also as a gallery. They had the gallery that I worked at as well down below me, and that eventually showed my work. But she also started a magazine in the East Village, and I think it was called Edges. Now I should know this, but I need to get that down. But I think it's called Edges. And so I asked her, knowing her history, how much should I charge? And so back in the day of faxes, even though she was just downstairs, she says, fax me over your rates. And she's from the South, and my mother's from the South. So, there's that Southern sickness going on too. But so I would fax down, and she'd go, too high, too high, too high. Finally, we get to what she said was just right. It was just kind of like the Three Bears and the porridge. Till it was just right. And so with the galleries, what we really encourage, because we couldn't beat Art Forum, of course, is we really encourage that the advertisements would not be time sensitive. We just say, put your roster down and have one of your artists design the page. Make it an art project. Or if you want 2 pages, make it an art project. And some of the most successful were like Bronwyn Keenan, who's no longer a gallery, but she really did some nice ones. Brad Kalhammer, who's a wonderful artist, designed pages for her. And then even Budweiser, which was our first big patron besides Helmut Lang. First, it was Budweiser in the very first issue. It was, I don't know if you remember the Ants. There's another one that they beat Geico. They had the Geico, but it was not a Geico. They were doing that in the early 90s. But for us, they did one which was a keyhole. And you look through the keyhole, very Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And you look through the keyhole like this, and the whole picture on the image of the page was this giant keyhole, and you look through and there's a Budweiser in the keyhole, and I think it says either trompe l'oeil or something like that, some art term. And I wish we had a Zing Magazine one here, but I don't see one. We could look at it, but if you look at Zing Magazine's newly redesigned website, you might be able to see an old advertisement. But if there isn't, that's something that we should put in there, are the advertisements. I haven't looked. Yes, we do have advertising. And we also, lots of different little things came out of Zing Magazine, like Zing Rex, which is our weekly newsletter that goes out and tells people what's going on around town. That's free. And it's it's used by quite a lot of people. We also had a Zing Magazine projection drawing series where we would go to the art fairs, and we asked Zing Magazine artists, specifically people that are excellent people that draw, and we'd ask them to give us a drawing that we would project against the wall and then copy it enlarged. And we have one of those in the Dikeou Collection by Olav Westphalen, and it's on the alleyway of the Newhouse Hotel, which is our Colfax space on Grant and Colfax. And so the alleyway between Grant and Logan.
And I want to mention right now, if you want to check out Zing Magazine, you should, subscribe.
Yes, we do subscriptions, but remember, we come out when we come out. So, the next one isn't coming until 2024. So
you have time to save.
Yes, exactly. But go ahead.
Oh, but you mentioned that you revamped the website. So you have a new website.
www.zingmagazine.com.
So you definitely should go check that out and cull through the archives. I mean, there's a lot of great stories and art and information that I've been able to see so far. And so this actually plays into the whole collection, and let's talk about that.
Okay.
And you do this with your brother, correct?
Yes, Pawnee Dikeou. And it really starts with Mrs. de Menil's liquor closet. I really wanted him because we would go around as young artists. I was talking about, you'd kind of meld within these groups, you'd make these dates. Let's go see 7 galleries, and maybe with a few people from Yale, like Aaron Namenworth, or a few people from RISD, Janine, and Paul Ramirez Jonas, who was my housemate at Brown. Say, let's go look at some galleries or something like that. And then you'd kind of wind down and say, well, if, who did you think was really good? And who would you buy if you had a collection? So, just like fantasy football, but fantasy art. That should be a game. Somebody should be making money on it. So you'd kind of do that. And in the meantime, you're trading with artists and people are gifting you art. You'd go to someone's art opening and you'd make a little something for them and take it to them at the opening, little gifts like that. And so that started, I pointed out the 2 pieces, that the big ones, the Goodenough and the Warhol, that were really, truly art pieces. You're not taking that to an opening. But all that you saw, not quite Mrs. de Menil's liquor closets, those are true gifts or trades. And so my brother had always gone with me to all the museums. Like we'd go somewhere I'd say, let's go check out the Walker if we're in Minneapolis, or let's go check out, wherever we were in Mexico. We'd go to the Tamaya collection or museum or wherever it was. We'd go check it out. And so he was pretty aware of stuff. But, he's getting to know Cindy Sherman and wants to buy Cindy Sherman 15 years too late. When I'm showing him Cindy Sherman, when he actually maybe could have afforded it. But I kind of presented it to him. But he knows it and loves it too, because he's been to all these museums with me. But his vocabulary isn't as adept as mine. And so I set up in the hallway in my loft all the different little pieces. And there's the Sarah Staten check. There's Janine Antoni thimbles. There's Paul Ramirez little firecrackers. There's a Lawrence Seward piece. There's Gregor Muir. Devon is a Place in England. And I have about 10 or 15 little pieces that I've traded or that have been gifted to me. And I said, these are the people of our era. These are the next Cindy Shermans, And I have the opportunity to meet so many of them through Zing Magazine. Let's give some of them the opportunity to actually take these projects that we're so lucky to have in a magazine and make an exhibition, make it come to life. And so that's what we've done. And so, we traveled together and collected and would think of different artists. And, sometimes we would buy an artwork and then they would do a project in Zing Magazine. And sometimes it's the other way around. You see the project in Zing Magazine and then, you would buy the project, not just the entire project, maybe some of it and then some newer work or things like that. And then that's kind of how both the collection and the magazine they support each other in that sense. And they are separate, but they are headed by me. And so, they do share things. And then there's failures along the way too. We had a thing called the Evil Machines. That was mine without my brother's participation. But the idea was that there would be kiosks around Soho, 6 different kiosks designed by 6 different artists. So we had Christian Schumann, Rachel Harrison, Ricky Albenda, Kenny Schachter, Rainer Gonal, Lee Stetzel. Did I say Rachel Harrison? Anyways, there's 6 or 7. And each kiosk you could go and you would type up and it would give you a map. This is now really happening. But this was an idea that was a very rudimentary idea. And it would print out where like Naked Lunch was, one of our advertisers. But that's a bar named after the Burroughs novel of the same title. But we were just in San Francisco, and Francis Ford Coppola has a restaurant in San Francisco where he does a lot of his editing or something. It's called Zoetrope, which is the name also of his magazine, which, if you read the book From Easy Rider to Raging Bull, it's a time when the huge movie studios started to die and the auteur comes along, the actor, who is, Warren Beatty or Redford, or Coppola is not really an actor, but they are making things outside the studio system, and they're becoming the producer themselves. And so the Zing magazine kind of was that. It was a producer itself. So you can see content and feel content and exhibit content before content is in MoMA. You're trying to create content, and that's what Zing magazine was doing. And it's very important when you create content to create context. And so that's what both of those things try to do, is create content and then create the context for which that content is seen through its best lens. And you can see that happening at that time period in the movies really easily. And it's happening everywhere in all different things because of the whole, do it yourself in the early 90s was like a really fancy woohoo term, like renegade and what was the other one? I keep forgetting them. Renegade and
Rogue.
There, I can't keep them both for the life of me. But those were the big terms, and now there's more of that everywhere. Anyone can do their own thing, and so it's kind of out of those spirits that both of those enterprises really connected and began.
I like the terms rogue and renegade better.
Yes.
Just so you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, they're less commercial, aren't they?
Yeah. Pop-up. You hear that all the time. I'm
exactly.
Kind of sick of that term, actually.
It is. Well, exactly. And, pop-up, it tells you that it's a temporary space, that there's sales going to happen, and rogue and renegade tell you neither of those things.
Right.
They just tell you that it's not permanent, which pop-up also does tell you. So that's the difference. And a lot of this is the vernacular, and part of what we're going to try to explore if I ever do get these books done comes from, the two sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Pop-up is the English term for rogue and renegade. And rogue and renegade make more sense in terms of like our talking about pilgrimage. They're not going to talk about pilgrimage in a place like London. They are going to talk about something like a pop-up. It's more like a mushroom, versus we're more like in a field of aspen.
So should it be, instead of the Dikeou pop-up, should it be Dikeou Rogue?
Well, we've gone with pop-up, and branding tells us branding is good. So we're going to stick with pop-up for now. But it has plenty of more elements that are rogue and renegade than it does as a pop-up, because it's been there for a long time.
Right.
And I guess it's more of a differentiation from the big space, I guess, eventually. But I think that branding is really important. And I think it's hard because places like museums, and just because the Denver Art Museum is opening up again, we're talking about these things like branding. Truly, we're always going to call the Ponte building the Ponte building. We're not going to call it the North building. We're not going to call it the Martin building. We're not going to call the Liebskein the Hamilton building. We're not going to call the new Welcome Center, the Anna and John C. building. You're just not going to do that. Sovietti is a little name, is not a known quantity as the other two Starchitects names are, but it will be. It's a fabulous job.
Since you do this with your brother, the collection, how does that work? Do you each get a vote? Because we've talked to other collectors, and when there's like a husband and wife team, like Dennis Scholl, we've talked to Dennis.
Yes.
And we went to get him on at some point to talk about collecting, because he's collected so many different things.
Of course.
The way that they collect is that for them to acquire a piece, each of them have to agree on that particular piece. It's not like Dennis can go out and just buy whatever. If he sees something that he likes, he has to come back to Deborah and confer with her before they acquire something. Is that how you guys work as well? Or
no, we don't do the voting thing. We're pretty much in agreement about the kind of art that we want to collect already. So we know when we're collecting, we want to collect significantly of whoever it is that we're collecting. So again, if they make drawings, we don't want one drawing. We don't collect names. Like, it's really easy, especially when you go to the art fairs. You see a really great piece by an artist, Thomas Demand. So he creates like scenes, and he miniaturizes them, and he makes them out of tape or other different things. Or he creates big things and he covers them with all different kinds of tape. So he made this huge, wonderful piece. It's a CNN necklace, but it's like a wrap necklace. It's all gold tape, and it's huge. It's as big as, well, this isn't that big of a wall, but it's definitely as big as this wall that is behind you. And it's an edition. It's one of maybe 8. And it's such a great piece. And you're like, one of 8, well, and it's not too terribly expensive. So you're like, this is great. Well, it is a great piece, but it's an edition 1 of 8. And every collector is going to think the same thing that you're going to think. And so we try to identify that would be a great piece. That would be a fun piece to have. You'd love to have that piece. But everybody else that is collecting has that piece. And so we really try to think that way. Don't go for that. We try not to buy at fairs because it's really easy to get sucked into the thing it is about fairs. We try to think of the artists for a long time before we really make a commitment to them. But we want something significant, you know. In certain cases, the Crawling Japanese Businessman, Momio Teramitsu, we saw our show at PS1 and we're like, this is a great piece. We think enough alike that we don't have to, I think it's great, that's my vote, what's your vote? We're maybe, I don't know, that's just how we are. So that's how we kind of do it. Sometimes we collect things individually too. So if he doesn't like something and I like it, I'll collect it individually, vice versa. And we live with the other's choices, but there's very few that it's that way. Very few.
Yeah, I was curious how you operate and how that goes, how you go about doing that, how you acquire it.
Well, a lot of it happens, you know, first I'm lucky enough to, before they get in Zing magazine, to have some studio visits with them, with the artists. And then that, it's kind of like, that is the prequel. And then also, I know this, everyone kind of tries to say this, and I'm sure, you know, it's been said in a lot of different other places, but we want to be friends with the artists. We don't want it to be just like, you know, we buy the work. We want the work to be seen. We've made a huge commitment towards it being available to the public and free to the public, and that there be some programming for the public. Again, back to this Judd model, that it's a commitment for over a lifetime. It's not a commitment for a few years or a few months, but a long period of time of their art viewing life. And that's an important thing. But a lot of collectors will say, you know, we want to be friends and we want to do everything to help their career. Of course we do too. Everyone says that. We really are trying. When possible, we have the artists come out, we have them talk, do an artist talk. We try to record it, and for posterity, we try to, in the case of certain artists, if they do performance, like Lizzie as a DJ, have her DJ, you know, or we are hopeful, knock on some wood, that she'll come out and do a performance here with Brian DeGraw, who's one of the people that she's collaborated with. She's been an actress and an IUD. These are bands, so artists in bands. So, and, you know, we stay committed to the ones that, even if we can't buy everything all at once, we buy it over time. We also try to buy work that we think is unique to the artist, but also unique for the viewer. That's work that
you're not going to see it in other people's collections. There's no sense in that. There's enough collectors. There's no reason to collect this beautiful Thomas Demand piece that 8 other collectors that are collecting the same group of artists. There's no reason for us to be that person. It's a beautiful piece. I love this piece. It's a beautiful artist. But we're trying to get things that are unique and representative of the best of the artists. Everyone says these things. We're not doing anything new. We're just trying to, of course, see what other people are doing and do the best that we can do in the models that we see as successful, I suppose.
And once you acquire a piece, you don't turn around and sell any of this art, right?
We haven't sold anything yet. I don't know that we won't ever sell it. I'm hopeful that we won't. You never know what circumstances may happen, both in the art world and any other kind of circumstances, but you're hopeful that you won't sell it. We've never put anything up for auction or sold it to another collector or anything like that, back to the gallery, which does happen. And I have to say, our method seems to be pretty good, because there's not a piece in my mind that has been something that we wish we hadn't collected. And I don't know that that's true with a lot of people, but I know it's true with us. And I think that that's a pretty important thing to say, because we're thoughtful about the time it takes to collect the artists that we want. We don't just do it. It might take us a long time to think, like, okay, so the Momio was a quick purchase, but, there's other artists that are way longer, that you take way longer to get at. Although Margaret Lee said something once, which I found to be a really lovely compliment. She was at a dinner with different people, and there was a bunch of artists there. She and her husband also own 47 Canal, which is a gallery. So she's an artist. She's a studio manager, Cindy Sherman. And so she's an artist in her own right. She owns a gallery. She's a collector in her own right, collecting from the gallery, which she shows artists in. And she's a studio manager for arguably the most important female artists of the 20th century. She said at this dinner, they all went around the room and they said, "Who was your very first collector?" And about 4 artists said Dikeou Collection, which was really exciting. And I know who those artists are, because we do take chances. And we take chances where we know someone else won't. And choose work that's really hard. Who wants a big cube? That's hard. It's not hard when you're Wade Guyton now, but it's hard when you're Wade Guyton, at Hunter. So we're willing to take those chances. And that made me really happy that the artist said, it's a Dikeou Collection. And that's good.
Yeah, that's spectacular.
I remember I saw, speaking of Walker Evans, a Walker Evans show along with Dan Graham at the Whitney. That was a joint show. And next to it was Via Selmans. And I was there with a bunch of these people from the early 90s when we went up to the museum, and nobody had a press pass yet. It's before Zing Magazine. And Via Selmans was showing. She had a retrospective there. And the term artist was being bantered around about Via Selmans, and it was certainly the first time that I was introduced to her artwork. But I fell in love with it, of course, because it's just, those waves and this incredible diligence of pencil to the pencil is just wild. And it was wonderfully curated next to the Walker Evans and the Dan Graham, suburban houses. And I thought to myself, if I ever am called an artist, I would be so happy. When artists recognize that other artists are doing, that's the best compliment. And that's when that Margaret Lee comment felt so nicely, because artists recognizing, that I'm making good choices on as a role as a collector and as an artist, and that I think that's kind of sums it up. But to full circle back to the Mrs. de Menil, here you make no choices. You just get what you trade for or are given. And that's what kind of engendered the whole beginning of the collection. And in the end, it's the perfect kernel, because you start out, it's as a gift, and then it becomes a collection, and then it becomes an art piece, which is in a museum, which is in a house owned by a museum owner, which is then in a fair, which is then in a sort of a museum private collection, and it's an art piece that you made. So it's all of those things wrapped in one. Kind of like Nautilus, more than a Venn diagram folding in on itself.
What does it mean to be an artist?
I don't know. It's the eternal question, I suppose. I think being an artist is just having an open heart, an open eye, and a willingness to test your boundaries every day and to see something anew in the same thing you see every day. And it can be hard, because Walter Benjamin has taught us a tough lesson in this age of mechanical reproduction. Impressionism isn't what it used to be. And to see that impressionist, to see something that you really, truly don't like, in my case, Renoir, and to see something good in it, that makes an artist. And to find something good in it. And to find something that you don't see as art at all, something good there.
Can you separate the art from the artist? You spoke about having a good eye, a kind heart as an artist. But not everybody's that, right? But they produce significant work, beautiful work. They're not necessarily nice people.
Well, probably the best artists aren't. I remember, if you can believe, I learned something from Keeping Up with the Kardashians. And here goes. It was an episode. Kim is going out with Reggie Bush, who had just won the Super Bowl. And she's having a party in her new house, and they'd just gotten into their whole black and white decorating phase. So everything is white with a touch of black here and there. And Chloe and Courtney are just getting twisted. They're drinking more tequila than God. And Bruce, he's not Caitlin yet, has come over. And she's really upset that Reggie Bush hasn't come to her party. He's just won the Super Bowl, mind you. And it kind of goes back to that time word, tid soptimist. And she's really upset that Reggie Bush isn't there. And he doesn't even want to be on the Kardashians anyways. He's like on, of all the different boyfriends, he's on the least amount of time. And she's crying. And then, the girls are messing up her white apartment or her house or whatever it is. And she's really upset. And he's like, look, it's just a party. You just go enjoy yourself with your sisters. And she goes, but Reggie, you know all this. And he goes, let me just explain to you. He just won the Super Bowl, all right? Just to get to, and not only won it, he was the MVP, all right? This is the pinnacle of his life. And he goes, when I won the triathlon, I didn't pay attention to my family. I didn't pay attention to my relationships, anybody. He said, there wasn't enough time in the day for me to physically do everything I needed to do in order to win that. And you have to be incredibly selfish in order to achieve greatness like that. And he is at that point. He doesn't have time for Chloe and Courtney, drinking tequila, or this stupid television show, even though he sucked that up later, But he gave her a really sage piece of advice, and something that she really took to the bank. Boy, did she ever. She figured out how to time manage, speaking of that career of hers, and even the, not Kylie, but the one that's the model of the Jenner two children, Kylie and Kendall. I think it's Kendall. And she said, you have 2 years to be a model. That's it. That's all you have. If you want to be a model, that's it. So you have to work really, really incredibly hard. Otherwise, you're going to be beaten by the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills kid. Bella and the other one, Gigi. But I can't think of their last name. But Bella and Gigi, those two sisters. And she says, and she was right. And they are fighting for, the model of that generation. And she manages her time exceptionally well for the amount of time that she can make money. And boy, did she make it. And it's almost up. And so I learned that. And I think that probably some of the best artists aren't the best people. Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg broke up, almost never spoke again. In my mind, Rauschenberg is the better artist, maybe the better person, though I don't know. But he's tended to kind of collaborate with people and was not so one path, But I don't imagine that Jeff Koons is the best person, but he's a very successful artist. Although I hear Damien Hirst is really a nice person. So there you have it. I don't think Warhol was particularly nice, but for me, the open heart makes you able to do that. Is Serena Williams a really nice person?
Maybe not. Who knows?
Probably not. She got really upset at that referee when the game was called for Kim Clijsters, and that stymied her chance at a U.S. Open, and so.
So my question, since you mentioned Damien Hirst, is what do you think the role of art appropriation or even cultural appropriation? In Damien Hirst's case, he got kind of called out in Australia for appropriating
the Aboriginal.
Yeah. So what's your thoughts?
Well, I think that in Damien Hirst's case, with the Aboriginal, and even the piece that was shown at the Venice Biennale, where we were speaking about in Palazzo Grazi, I mean, it's very hard for a white dude to go in with the means that he has and kind of start to make work about these outsider situations. And the piece in the Venice Palazzo Grazi was about that slave ship that crashed off of the coast of Africa somewhere. I think his work is best when he appropriates and no narrative has to be told. And I think that appropriation is always best when the narrative is implicit in the object. I mean, isn't that the true Duchampian move, after all? To take the bottle rack, which to today's viewer seems like something that is completely outdated. We don't know what a bottle rack is. Now we see it as like Keith McNally French bistro decor, but it was something that was on the streets of Paris, for people to dry their bottles on. And he saw it as one of the first found art objects. And found art is another word for found art is appropriation. So I think that the best appropriation, whether it's Damien Hirst or anyone else, is when the thing being appropriated is a common enough lexicon that it doesn't need the narrative. I think that outsider art, and that's not even really a good term, but for lack of a better one in this conversation, it does need the narrative. It needs the narrative of that this was made by this person in this context. Damien Hirst's best work doesn't need that narrative. And when he creates a narrative, it fails miserably. It doesn't fail because it's Damien Hirst and the market won't allow for that. But that's a whole nother question. That's market as opposed to pure content. But Damien Hirst, like all artists of a certain echelon, that was when I was at Parsons for summer school, we had to read The Shock of the New, and that guy wrote art criticism. John Hughes, I can't remember his first name. I want to say John Hughes, but I think that's the guy that did Pretty in Pink. But it's Hughes, Robert Hughes maybe. But, he's saying, that Schnabel at that time, who was a very young artist, that'll never be anywhere near Picasso, or, that's, for the riffraff, 15 years from now, nobody will be talking about. That's just not true. The market supported Schnabel, and it'll never go down. The only artist in that whole group, market-wise, that was ever that the market didn't support was with Charles Saatchi and him dumping Sandro Chia. when he had too much Kia and he decided he didn't want it. And that type of painting had collapsed anyways with the stock market and the speculation of that kind of artwork. And he had too much of it. And so he just dumped it. And it's really a shame because they aren't that bad of paintings. And they were sold too high and he dumped it. That was one of the few times that the collector had the ability to change the market of an artist at a very specific time. And the collector, I mean, the dealers are much more careful about that now than they were back then.
You have collectors?
I do not really. I have the Wes Collection. That's one of my collectors. I have artist friends that are collectors, but I need the resume to look. I'm in the Samsey Collection in which is an artist residency, and I did Asphalt Jungle there, which is the parking lot, and they have a edition of that in South Korea. Samsey's kind of like Benetton. It's a clothing company, and their foundation it's an interesting place. That's artist residencies on 3 floors of the building, and then on the ground floor is a bar, and on the second floor is an auditorium, a recording studio on the 3rd floor. So then in the bar, it's also an open area. And there's 2 gallery spaces on the bar level, and then they have swap meets, so people bring in all their vintage clothes and trade. So it's an interesting place. So I'm in theirs. I'm in Kenny Schachter's collection, so those are the big names.
You have a long association with him.
Yes.
How did you guys meet?
Through Paul Ramirez Jonas, who was my housemate at Brown, and he was a young curator in the early 90s. And I met him, again, through these groups of artists that you sort of start to meet, and through Paul Ramirez Jonas. And then he started curating shows. His first show was with Sandra Gearing, and he had at the time started collecting German art, more not secondary market, but a second generation, a generation above our generation. And so Baselitz and that all those German people. So he had German work on paper, and that was his first show. And then he started doing literally a show a month in these renegade spaces all over Soho. And then he moved to London, and he's had a long and storied career because he did a lot with Zaha Hadid and produced a lot of things with her, and then with Vito Acconci in Acconci studio as an architect, not just as an artist. So his gallery in the West Village was all Vito Acconci design. So it's really cool. You'd go in and the desk was a hinge, and then it came down like this and swooped around like this and came down. It was really spectacular.
All these pieces that I see here now, part of Mid-Career Smear, they would be for sale if somebody was wanting to acquire.
Yes, for sure. Degas didn't sell many paintings ever in his lifetime. And I'm not afraid of that. I wish that they would sell. I wish they had a life with someone else too. But that hasn't been, at a certain point you kind of go, well, that's not what they are. I'm actually really lucky because I have them all and I can do with them what I want, which was the same thing that happened with Degas. And, he really was the master of his pieces. Same with Clifford Still. I consider him to be one of the first installation artists. He said, okay, I don't want to sell it this way. I want my work hung a very, very specific way, and I'll die before it's hung any other way. He gave specifically to 3 different places, San Francisco, the Met, and the Albright Knox. And that's it. And then we have what is left here. What is left, it's all of it. And that's a pretty incredible thing. And Degas is in a similar way that way. There's plenty of artists that way that, have not been widely collected. And that makes borrowing them very easy.
In Ray Rinaldi's review of Mid-Career Smear, he called it a pre-tech poor man's Meow Wolf. How do you feel about that comment?
Well, things are always going to be compared one thing to another. We just spoke about Renoir and Degas, two impressionists, one who I adore and one who I don't. So there's always comparisons, and whether they're apt or not is really not my job to say, but I will say this. There is something that's happening in the art world, and we spoke about it with relational aesthetics. It's happening specifically in the West. It started with Meow Wolf in Santa Fe. And then, it went to Vegas and it has come here. I haven't had the chance to see Meow Wolf here. So my take on it is through articles that I've read, not unlike what Ray said there. I expect it to be an experiential thing. And after all, relational aesthetics in its definition is by nature experiential. Meow Wolf is, they've put a lot of money into it, and it is an experiential thing. And I think it's experiential in the way that, lots of things are experiential. The way that Blue Man Group is experiential, the way that Cats was experiential when the cats are coming out and, clawing at you. And these are revolutionary things at the time, Now they seem like they aren't revolutionary, that a play is made about a book of poems that Ezra Pound wrote about cats, and they make it into a whole musical. And that the primaries are not characters that are human, they're cats. And 50% of the people don't even like cats. And that this thing becomes something that there's this point, it's New York Stories, and it's Coppola does one part, Scorsese does one part, and Woody Allen does one part. And in the Woody Allen part, it's at the height of Cats being the most kitschy thing in the universe. And he's greeting his great aunt in some building in Midtown, and it's a white office building. And here they come. They've just been to Winter Garden, and they've got all their cats, pair of buttons all over in every size, shape, and form. But, this was an experience, Cats. And, in the best of all worlds, experiences are great. And if they reach people, great. And experience is one of those ways that breaks down the white cube. And certainly I'm breaking down the white cube. I imagine that Meow Wolf is much more experiential than what I do. And bravo. I think it's great. Anytime somebody's creativity is blossomed or piqued, Piqued, is tremendous. And it doesn't always have to be, my particular aesthetic, which is very dry, as I said, with my frail arrows that aren't really even mine, but that, how can that compete with an answering machine? The answering machine's always going to lose, And so bravo for Denver for having yet another venue that the city, or I don't know how the funding for that came about, but bravo for having another experience for people to go to and experience a visual phenomenon.
The reason I asked that question is I've been to both.
Okay.
I was fortunate enough to go get a preview of Meow Wolf here, Convergence Station. And very enjoyable experience. I know a lot of artists that provided work for that. Completely different.
Yes.
Than what you do.
Yes.
That was very hands-on experience, very sensory overload in some ways, but in a good way. So I wouldn't ever disparage Meow Wolf. I did really enjoy myself. But like I said, two completely different experiences in my book. And what you do, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, really made me stop and think and reconsider some of the things that, some of the ideas that I had about art. You changed that in that experience. So I would consider what you do very much a thinking person's experience, and not that Meow Wolf isn't, but it's more, as one of my friends described it that was with me, it's like being a 6-year-old again. You know, you're running around, there's all kinds of crazy colors and lights and things that you can flip and open and control. And obviously it's interactive and hands-on here as well, but completely different experience. So I was just curious. That's where that question came from.
Well, I think it's good. I haven't seen it, so I've only read about it, and my take on it is exactly how you described it. It has a very specific aesthetic, and when I say this, I don't mean it at all derogatory, because I love haunted houses. It's like haunted house meets Broadway, and art and visual art, and there's other artists too. Kenny Scharf. I just saw a show at the Brooklyn Museum, Cause, he's a graffiti artist. There's plenty of graffiti artists that, Banksy, Shepard Fairey, where and the street is very much like they're trying to also bring street into, from what I understand, street culture into a more contained place. A lot of the visual cues come from street art. And that's a very important place. That's one of the most primal places that we see things. That's where I get the gates. It's you're walking down the street. There's another E.B. White quote, but I won't be able to find it, but I can give you the gist of it. There was a Village Voice article at about the same time that I was reading it, and it talked about New York as a neighborhood. I think Meow Wolf is kind of trying to create an art neighborhood that you can go in for a few hours and you're in this neighborhood. And E.B. White says it very well this way. I walk out of the house in the morning and I walk down the stairs, out the door. I pick up my cigarettes, walk to the end of the block. I get my shine, drop in my note tip for the coal to be delivered. That's the only thing we don't do now. Pick up a flower for my girl, get a cup of coffee, pick up the newspaper, get to the office, make a few phone calls. On the way back, collect the ice. Oh, drop off your clothing to the dry cleaner. On the way back, he does the exact same thing in reverse. And he goes all within a block, and it's kind of what I expect it's what I want out of an art experience for sure. What I hope you get here. But I expect in a totally different aesthetic way, you never have to leave the neighborhood. You get it all right there. And I think the comparison is fine. Yet I think the missions are completely different.
50 years from now, where do you see the Dikeou Collection and where do you see your work?
It's really hard because are we, even as a society, going to be around in 50 years? You hope so. And so if we go with society is going to be around, they're having these kind of questions over at the Denver Art Museum, because it is the 50th anniversary of the Ponte building itself. What will the aims be in 50 years of seeing art? And you hope that you have chosen well as far as the collection is concerned, and you have made pieces that will be relevant 50 years from now. You hope that that's the case. You go into Museum of Modern Art, and now they're rechanging the way that we talk about art. It's less in the Occidental way that we have been taught to appreciate art. So the dialogue is always going to change, and the context will always change. If there's enough documentation about the work and enough about the original intentions of the work, then it's pretty good, But there's things, that are happening that, like The Real Fake, or was on 60 Minutes last week, about where they can make somebody an avatar, essentially, of someone who doesn't exist. Like, this is not a real person.com. And they look really real, and that they can make Hillary Clinton say something that she never said, and that's going to happen. But then you also see that there's good possibilities for all these types of technology and things. I just, hope that we've done a good enough job as caretakers at the time that we're here for the work, and there's enough documentation that it is there for others to enjoy. If it's not, I hope they find, and I hope I do enough good caretaking while I'm alive for it to be put in at least a chance for it to be put in the right hands and for it to continue to speak to an audience so long as there is an audience. But, we're all betting on the future after all. If you're going to be making anything, you're even betting on tomorrow. You make a pie, that it'll get eaten.
One last question. This is a desert island question, and especially since we all are from the era of television. Desert island, you get one TV program that you get to have that you can watch, and I look at some programs as very comforting, like a warm blanket in some ways. That's the way it is for me.
I have it for books. I don't know that I have it for TV, but I'll venture a guess. Well, so long running, you go with Bonanza because it has the most episodes, so that your chances of seeing it over and over again are going to be better because you have more episodes. So it's the longest running TV show. So you go with Bonanza there. Magnum's up there for sure. Mary Tyler Moore is up there. Just the song, is enough to bring tears to your eyes. Somewhere in this, we have Joan Jett singing it. Mary Tyler Moore song. Well, I'm going to go with all Star Treks. Why not? Because there's enough. You can't get that bored.
Yeah, that would keep you busy for a long time.
And I don't know, but they don't count those as one series, but all Star Treks. So Magnum's up there.
Is that because of Tom Selleck?
No, there's a formula that he does, Belisario, because NCIS follows the same formula, but I do like Tom Selleck better than I like Mark Harmon. He's married to Pam Dauber, Mark and Mindy.
Yes, that's right.
Still married, too, which is incredible. But the Belisario thing, he did Jag, too. It's always like there's the unknowing good guy or sort of knowing good guy. Mark Harmon knows more than Magnum. Magnum is unknowing. Then there's the old guy that will tell you the stories, which is Ducky versus Higgins. Yeah. Then in NCIS, there's the girl with the pigtails, the punk girl.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's Carol in Magnum, that is never the romantic interest. And then there's the posse, which is always in Mark Harmon's whoever he has, the Matthew Weatherly and then the Zeta and the computer guy. And in the case of Magnum, it's TC and Orville. And then, of course, my favorite character in Magnum is Mac, who is on Star Trek. Not Deep Space Nine, but I'm sure he shows up there. But Next Generation, he's the guy Q, who fucks with everyone. You always want a Q or a Mac to kind of, when everything is really going badly, to come in and just make it worse. So that's why Magnum is so successful, because of that. The whodunit element is what makes the Murder, She Wrote work. It's, of course, based on Ellery Queen and others of that time in the Sunday time period after 60 Minutes. And that it's Angela Lansbury, which is one of the great stage actresses ever. And she takes something that is just really stupid and makes it terrific, and that's not an easy job. But, there's so many because, Charmed is great. It takes all the myths, all of these kind of supernatural things, although supernatural is not the favorite of that genre. But Charmed is really pretty good. Come on, Beverly Hills 90210, Melrose. Give me spelling. Any spelling. Melrose is just brilliant. And as you guys said, Sammy Jo, she's in T.J. Hooker, she's in Melrose, she's in Spin City. She's in 2.5 Men. 2.5 Men is also really good. Chuck Lorre. Any Chuck Lorre comedy is pretty up there. So,
It's a whole collection she gets.
Yeah.
On that desert island.
I'll tell you what, Devin, you're a
walking
connoisseur of television. Like if I ever had a question, if I was on one of those trivial shows, right, and it's Call a Friend, I tell you who I'm calling right now. If it has to do with television, just about anything, actually, I think.
Sure.
Yeah. So
television, art,
I got to follow
architecture.
The new Magnum versus the old Magnum.
I've only seen half of an episode of the new Magnum.
Okay.
But I don't like that Higgins is a girl.
Yeah.
And they're doing that with all of them. And it's really funny, though, because with the new Dynasty, we used to have this party when I was a freshman and sophomore at Brown, even till I'm a junior. I don't think it survives while I'm a senior. But it was Dynasty on draft. And so everyone would get together on Wednesday night and we'd watch Dynasty. And I had napkins and everything. And, you know, there's this guy on our hall. His name was Jay Gibson. And, you know, he didn't know what Dynasty was. He's not watching Dynasty, but he's going to go to the party that the girls are throwing and watch whatever it is that all these girls are just obsessed with. And we had a good crew and they all came. So he moves to LA. He wasn't from there. I forget where he's from, but he moves to LA. He lives his whole adult life in LA and he writes. And so he goes into a meeting. They're remaking Dynasty. He's like, goes into a meeting and he's trying out to be a writer for it. He's like, oh my God. Thank God I went to all those parties.
That's awesome.
And he got the job. And so then we had a Dynasty reunion at the Loft in New York, and all the girls came, and it was a huge success. We even had a mariachi band playing the Dynasty theme song on the trumpets and everything.
Oh my God.
And it was a huge success. But I really hate when people say they don't like the new things. So I hate, because like there's some new things that are just infinitely better, you know, like Next Generation is infinitely better than Star Trek, and Deep Space Nine is infinitely better than Next Generation. You know, the characters are more complex. Although I have to say I haven't seen the whole Star Wars, so I can't say that about that. And I think it's hard when they do the prequels, but it's inevitable. Yeah. And that, you know, I hate to be the person that hates the new stuff, but sometimes it's just not as good.
Yeah. That's true. I usually feel that way a lot of times, but I probably go towards nostalgia.
Yeah, well, there's always something, nostalgia just rocks.
Right.
But then there's things like, okay, which came first, Petticoat Junction or Green Acres?
Yeah, I think Petticoat Junction, right?
Don't know.
And it ran longer than I thought, because I think it ran like 4 years.
Mm-hmm. It's on really late on MeTV. Yeah. It's not very
I watched
good.
one episode in the last year. I was up late and it was Petticoat Junction. I'm like, oh my God, I haven't seen that. And it was just like, oh, this is really corny.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
Except for he's a great character on Green Acres.
Yeah.
All right. Then you have things like, okay, you know, Frasier and Cheers. Frasier's infinitely better than Cheers.
Yeah.
You know, infinitely better. I mean, you watch some of those old episodes of Cheers, which is on Decades at about 11 at night, too. You can go with Taxi and Cheers, the 11 to 12 clocks. It's probably 11 to 1 because it goes 2 episodes of Taxi, 2 episodes of Cheers, or vice versa. I can't remember the order. But Cheers is like horribly sexist. I mean, that in Me Too. Right. You know, it is like, I mean, my God. You know, it's just like, really? And, but, you know, it was hugely popular at the time. I mean, really popular.
Yeah.
I love Frasier. That's one of those warm blanket.
Yes,
like,
of
makes
course.
me feel good, you know?
Exactly.
That's what my wife goes to sleep to every night.
It's great.
It is a good program to fall asleep to.
Earbuds.
I love Third Rock from the Sun.
Oh, God.
I thought that sitcom was so brilliant.
And so ahead of its time. And basically, it's, you know, the one with Sheldon.
Oh, Big Bang?
Big Bang Theory.
Yeah. Chuck Lorre again. But they get so many of their ideas from Third Rock.
Yeah.
You know, different people, but that created it. But that Big Bang is Chuck Lorre. But
Wow. This has been such a fun time.
Likewise.
Well, I think we should do it again because we just hit the surface.
I agree.
And I need to do some more reading because I feel like I'm not up to par yet.
No, you know all the TV. You were on the TV shows.
Just in the stuntman role, though. That was my
important.
role.
That's pretty important. I mean, I'm thinking of Orville, and this is something that really bugs me. Okay, that they no longer have is the intro song, and that's sets the tone for the whole show, and it's a good minute or two, and all those beautiful Mike Post songs, and the one with Magnum at 1 p.m. and it's on Hallmark Mysteries channel. The problem is they speed up the intro so they don't have that part, where Magnum's holding the girl in the swimming, the little part of where they put
and he kind of looks down and at her
he's
butt
like,
or whatever.
Yeah, like her ass is right there, like Kardashian style ass, and he kind of goes like this. That's the best part. Or when Mary Tyler Moore, because there's 2 Mary Tyler Moore intros, and the one that's better is when it's a little later in Mary Tyler Moore, not the initial one, when she gets the steak and she's just like, eating by myself again, and throws it into the shopping cart, or tries to wash the car with the Fran Tarkington jersey on. And it's really, truly not a Fran Tarkington or Viking jersey. But I mean, the thing is that intro is so important. It's important with that girl. It's important with like the animation of I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched. I Dream of Jeannie is better than Bewitched, although Bewitched is before I Dream of Jeannie, and there's several like that where they start out. It's the same premise, there's magic, and everybody's drinking, and that's how we're gonna explain away the magic is, let's have cocktails at lunch, Darwood, you drank too much, that's how you ended up, as a pig, but the thing is they've condensed it and they've sped the music up, which makes me so angry because I really enjoy those moments of that song. And it's like Cheers. It's one of those songs that everyone knows. They've even made it into an Applebee's commercial, but it's not good. And whereas Magnum's is really, really good and memorable. And CSI, not NCSI, CSI, they just took for each city a different Who song, Mm-hmm. And of course, the best one is Miami. And that's why Miami wins, is that song. It's not because Miami is any better plot. It's all the same plot, right. And the redheaded actor whose name escapes me now, but he learned, you got a series, you stick with it. Don't leave NYPD Blue to think you're making it to the big screen. You're not, buddy.
Right. Yeah.
Just stick with the series. You're lucky to get one.
He almost lost it.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Horatio, yeah. And he played on Hill Street Blues. He was
No, NYPD Blue.
Hill Street Blues, he was also the actor. He was a punk actor. And what is the guy's name? Now I'm like all...
David Caruso.
Yep,
David Caruso, yeah. He was on Hill Street Blues. He played one of the gang members. Yep.
Oh, I don't remember that.
I don't remember it either, but I know he's on NYPD Blue. He and Jimmy Smits.
Yeah.
And the guy Sipowicz.
Sipowicz, yeah.
I can't think of that. Dennis is either his name in the show or his name is the actor, but he's very
I think
good.
it's the name of the actor, yeah.
But anyways.
Anyway, thank you so much, Devon.
Thank you.
We really appreciate all the time you gave us today. And,
sure, thank you.
Essentially spending your Sunday with us. So.
Oh, God. And thank you, Haley, for coming in and helping with us.
Yes.
And then thank you to you two for listening to me talk for all this time, because I don't even want to listen to me for 10 minutes.
It was fantastic.
So we know who won't be listening to the episode, I think.
How much are you going to edit it?
If she doesn't like to hear herself on the answer machine,
Yeah, I know. No,
But after 3 and some hours of listening to yourself, you'll fall in love with your voice.
Yeah.
oh God, surely you're going to edit.
Oh, it'll be edited, but not that much. I'm feeling a little daunted right now. I feel like Stefan Lucero days, and the fact that I have a 6-hour drive tonight, and it'll be midnight before I get home.
I love you, man.
Oh,
And I gotta work tomorrow.
oh God.
Plus, I gotta figure out medical part B or D or whatever with my mom. So that'll be fun. That's tomorrow morning as well.
Oh God.
Lots of coffee.
Oh my God.
Devon, thanks again. Time.
Thank you.
We say it all the time. Time is the most precious thing we have. So the fact that you took so much time with us today
Tip
means the world.
Tipsoptimus.
Optimus.
The dyslexia kicked in and turned that P into a D. Okay.
To our listeners, check out all the various websites where you can find out about the Dikeou Collection. DikeouCollection.org is for the collection. DevonDikeou.com to see artwork of Devon's. And, of course, Zing Magazine, zingmagazine.com. For the Tenant Podcast, I'm Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown.
Have a great week.